Coming in at number 10 is Sync. Sync has the mutant ability of power mimicry, meaning, like Rogue, Sync can copy the powers of other mutants. Unlike Rogue, Sync has the benefit of not doing harm to whoever he is borrowing powers from, and he can also do it without physical touch. Recently though, after being resurrected, Sync got a bit of a power boost, and he may even become a new Omega level mutant. In the story, Sync not only uses his normal mutant powers to replicate the abilities of the mutants Sunfire and Cyclops while they were both nearby, but is also able to tap into Jean Grey's telekinetic abilities while she is literally all the way chillin' on Mars. Sync's growth in power post-resurrection was first noticed back in 2021's X-Men number 18, with Sync documenting that he was now able to sync not just with mutants, but other superhumans as well, which is quite the boost, and I think it just keeps going up and up and up. In the House of M alternate reality, Sync even got to the point of permanently retaining others' powers, which would be an incredible significant power boost as well. As a main member of the X-Men though, it's kinda hard to be surprised he's getting power boosts. So, yeah.
At number 9 is iBoy. iBoy is usually undervalued because he looks really silly, and I get it. He does look like if the drummer for Kings of Leon had 57 eyes, but you should never judge a book by its cover because although iBoy doesn't look very menacing and seems rather confused most of the time, he's actually got a pretty good power set. He's got the ability to see just about anything, no matter how small and no matter how far. But on top of his microscopic and telescopic vision, he can also see basically every light wave there is, including X-ray, infrared, and thermal, among many others, including the magical plane as well. He also has night vision and even chemical detection. That's right, he can see pheromone secretions from people, giving him a tracking ability as well. iBoy is just one of those sad cases where he's just too unsettling looking to really garner much respect for who he really is and what he's truly capable of.
Number 8. Domino. Nina Thurman is a mutant weapons expert and mercenary. Under the name Domino, she was introduced in the early 90s as a member of X-Force. Domino is a survivor of a bunch of unethical scientists who were trying to create the perfect weapon. Tale as old as time, really. But this means Domino has all the talents and skills you would expect of an expert mercenary or secret agent. But we're here to talk about powers, and Domino's are unique to say the least. Domino has probability manipulation powers, meaning she is almost always lucky. She exudes at all times a subconsciously activated field that alters the probability of occurrences in her line of sight in her favor. This means that whenever she is stressed, excited, or focused on something, things will go improbably well for her, and quite poorly for her opponents. Now there is a caveat to this. She needs to actively be trying to help herself for her power to work. So like, if debris is falling from the sky and was about to hit her on the head, she would still be hurt if she just stood still. But if she tried to avoid that debris, she would move perfectly to avoid each and every piece about to hit her. Now the full potential of Domino's abilities hasn't actually been fully realized yet, and Marvel has a knack for updating powers whenever they want. But with an ability to be lucky, there's only a finite amount of things you can't do.
At number 7, we've got Forget-Me-Not. Forget-Me-Not might also be a case of people judging a book by its cover because he doesn't really look too menacing, if we're being honest. But to be fair, his powers do also sound pretty lame at face value, so it could be that. Basically, this mutant can't be remembered by anyone he meets once he's out of sight. And as sad as this must be for him in his personal life, Forget-Me-Not can use this power to his advantage in a huge way in the right circumstances. In one case, he's even able to dupe all of X-Force when the team has to form an elaborate plan just to track him down. They're only able to finally catch him by having Dr. Nemesis record himself explaining to the team the existence of Forget-Me-Not as they search for him, and they keep watching it over and over again on their coffee breaks. And the only caveat to this whole situation is that the maintenance bots, along with, I'm assuming, any computer automated system, can remember Forget-Me-Not, which sort of weakens the potential for his powers in a way. So although he's more powerful than you might think, he's still got some vulnerabilities, but heck, everyone does, right? Forget-Me-Not.
Number 6. Dust. Created by Grant Morrison and Ethan Van Sciver for 2002's new X-Men number 133, Soraya Kadir is a young Muslim mutant who's enrolled in the Xavier Institute for Higher Learning. Now, she has largely been just a background character in the stories she shows up in, but Dust has been present for some of the largest events in recent X-Men history. Soraya was even one of the mutants who kept their powers after M-Day. Soraya is usually a pretty shy and quiet girl, but don't let that fool you. Her powers are no joke. Dust is able to transform into a cloud of sand, or dust, and even act as a violent sandstorm, literally stripping the flesh from her opponents. When she couldn't properly control her powers yet, Dust even unintentionally flayed two men alive after unleashing her power in an act of self-defense. Dust has also been shown to use her power internally, meaning like inside another person, entering her enemy's lungs and eroding them from the inside out, which is just a lovely thought. But wait! There's more. It also appears that Dust is immune to magic and telepathy based attacks in her sand form. The only problem is that if you pull out a hose or like a super soaker or something, she's pretty much done, as she's extremely vulnerable to water. She's a powerful mutant, but sorely underutilized.
At number 5 we have Marrow. I've covered this mutant in almost every one of my lists for the last few weeks now, and for good reason. She is just such an underappreciated mutant considering how versatile and honestly cool her powers are. And if you are a Marrow diehard fan, you know that she's had some difficulties with her powers, which might explain part of the reason why people tend to write her off. Initially, Marrow is unable to control the growth of her bones, which leaves her with some pretty painful and frankly terrifying looking struggles. But these days she's honed her powers and has become quite impressive as a result. Her extreme bone growth allows her to eject super durable spikes from her skin, and then she can use them as weapons. She is adept at hand-to-hand combat, so this, paired with her ability to literally grow her own weapons and then heal up without issue, makes her pretty unstoppable.
Number 4. Jubilee. Jubilee's energy plasmoids might actually be one of the most potent of the X-Men's arsenal. The plasmoids aren't fireworks, even though they look a hell of a lot like them. They're actually closer to superheated plasma. She can create a bolt of bright light, but she can also push out enough power to bend steel or destroy a tree. And with precision can even detonate microbursts inside someone's brain. So that's the amount of range we're talking about here. But that ain't all. It goes even beyond that. As Jubilee's Generation X instructor, Emma Frost, once speculated, if wielded properly, Jubilee could detonate objects on a subatomic level, meaning this unassuming mall rat can cause explosions of atomic proportions. She's a highly underrated character in the comics and gained a lot of popularity in the 90s thanks to the X-Men TV show. And while she's gone in and out of having powers, she still remains one of the cooler characters in the X-Men's lineup.
At number 3 is Morph. Morph might sometimes be underestimated because of his funny disposition and his somewhat harmless look. With one of the best personalities out of all the mutants in my opinion, Kevin Sidney uses humor to work through his internal issues after his mother's death. But externally speaking, he deals with his other issues using his totally underrated power set. Morph is a master shapeshifter, capable of changing his body and his voice to mimic those of others. Not to mention, he's also able to fly at speeds of 40 miles per hour and has a healing factor due to his ability to manipulate the makeup of his molecules. But what's coolest about his powers is that if he chooses to grow more muscles, his strength will actually increase along with his appearance, and even if he can't get his strength up to match his opponent, his defensive stats are insane due to his ability to absorb the impact of any physical projectiles by simply allowing them to pass through him.
Number 2. Gambit. Gambit has the really cool mutant ability of molecular acceleration, allowing him to convert the potential energy of a non-living object through touch and kinetically excite the molecules to the point that they explode. Usually when a mutant has an ability that manipulates molecules, they have a pretty vast array of powers. But for Gambit, he mainly uses his abilities as attacks. charging up his signature playing cards and bow staff. But in an alternate universe, there is a future variation of Gambit known as New Sun, who is what Gambit would be if he reached the full potential of his power. He can manipulate kinetic energy down to a molecular level, meaning New Sun can charge objects and living beings without being in contact with them. He can stop objects that are in motion and make still objects begin moving. He can turn into a wave of energy, letting him travel through space and other dimensions, and he was even able to defeat the Dark Phoenix in his own universe by himself. We do see 616 Gambit use a lot of the same abilities as New Sun in a fight between the two in Gambit's 1999 solo series, but just knowing the potential this awesome Cajun sensation can reach, ooh, it's spicy.
At number 1 is Chamber. Chamber is another underrated mutant with a power set that isn't quite appreciated the way it should be. It may have something to do with the trauma that Jonathan Starsmore goes through to acquire his powers, and further how that experience hinders him from achieving certain goals that other more accomplished mutants are able to. Basically, Chamber has what's described as a furnace of psionic energy stored in his chest, and when his powers are first discovered, this energy explodes out of him, destroying the lower half of his mouth and blowing a hole in his chest cavity, forcing him into intensive surgery to reconstruct the lost body parts. Eventually, he hones his powers to a point where he can aim psionic blasts on command, which is kind of like Cyclops, except in this case it's coming out of a hole in his chest. But what's more is that Chamber later learns that he's in fact a descendant of Apocalypse, and he is eventually properly reconstructed by Clan Akaba in the appearance of Apocalypse. Although this leads him into a depression, Chamber then gets a huge power boost from this modification and changes his name to Decibel before joining the New Warriors.
Kicking off the list at number 10, we have Multiple Man. James Madrox. He made his first comic book appearance in Giant Size Fantastic Four, issue 4, and right off the bat, he seems very soft-spoken, he seems very gentle. I mean, the Thing is yelling at him and he's literally like, "Why do you reject me? Why?" Like, he's so almost poetic in a way. And then when the Thing goes to clobber him, bam, there's multiple more men. Now, he wasn't used very much in the X-Men, but he spent most of his days with X-Factor. But this guy is underrated. His powers may seem kind of weak compared to somebody like Jean Grey, but these duplicates can each make a duplicate.
Let me try something. I'm Mr. Meeseeks. Look at me. I'm Mr. Meeseeks. I'm Mr. Meeseeks. Look at me. Hi.
At one point, this guy had 40 of him running around town. 40. Now, the duplicates think, they feel, and they act independently, but they're guided by the original James Madrox. In a way, they're guided. They kind of know what to do. Each of these duplicates manifests one aspect of James' personality, and the longer the time away, the more those traits become extreme. And if one of these duplicates passed away, he can sense that the general area where the body is, which is like the saddest radar ever. This guy could take over the world if he wanted. It would be like that scene from The Matrix, but with more monologues probably. And before we go on to this list of X-Men you probably wouldn't expect to be that powerful, guys, if you want to go ahead and give this video a thumbs up, just right there, just give it a little tap tap, and it helps our studio out quite a bit. You guys are the best. Thank you so much for watching. Let's get back to the list. Lickety split. Number 9, Darwin. We saw this next mutant for a hot minute in X-Men First Class. He was played by Eddie Gathegi, who unfortunately didn't survive too long. See, he threw his life down on the line in order to protect his fellow X-Men. And this was still in the early days too. What a champ. He first showed up in the comics in 2005 with X-Men Deadly Genesis issue 2. Armando Munoz looked a lot different than we saw on screen as well. Since he was 4 years old, he was bald, his arms were super long, and his eyes were changing. He sure looks a little bit different than the young, handsome actor that we saw in the movie. His ability comes in handy a lot actually, more so in the X-Men movies. See, in the comics, he's practically immortal. His ability once allowed him to survive Hela's death touch. I mean, it's a little bit different than the last time we saw him, that's for sure. Number 8, Caliban. An albino mutant and former member of the Morlocks, Caliban made his first comic book appearance in Uncanny X-Men 148. So he has the ability to track down any mutant. He actually sacrifices himself in the movie Logan, where Stephen Merchant played him. He was also in X-Men Apocalypse for a bit too, played by a different actor. He was played by Tomas Lamarcus. He was originally an ally to the X-Men, but once he became a tracker for Apocalypse in X-Factor issue 24, titled The Fall of the Mutants. So he's pretty powerful, and he's done a lot of cool stuff too. He may seem like a gentle, lanky, pale man, but when Caliban is stressed out in the comics, he gains 2 additional powers: super strength and fear absorption. So if you put him in a corner, he'll be able to absorb the psionic energy in your fear and use it to power himself up even more. Number 7, Glob Herman, aka Robert Herman, although Glob is much more fun to say. He made his debut in New X-Men issue 117, and he grew up with a father who despised mutants, so already he's off to a pretty rocky start. So when Glob mutated, his father was just not on board, so his mother drove Glob out to Westchester and just left him for Professor X. Like you leave a baby at a fire station, it's just like, yep, here you go, your problem now. This mutation was interesting. So his skin was this transparent living wax, which he's able to maintain being on fire, which is pretty amazing off the bat. You can light him on fire and he's good to go. That's amazing. He runs with the New Mutants now, and although his name is silly and he's literally a glob, he can also possess powers of super strength and super speed, despite how he may look. So he can get hit by these massive bombs like it's nothing, then he can fight whoever launched that bomb with ease. The X-Men literally once used him as a heat shield once. They strapped Glob to the front of their ship, and it didn't seem pleasant for a man Glob, but he was good. He didn't die or anything. He had to rest for a bit. Number 6, Toad. When you think of the name Toad in relation to a superhero, you're gonna picture something pretty silly in your head. And Mortimer Toynbee isn't that far off from what you'd think. He made his first appearance in Uncanny X-Men issue 4. So he hops around, which seems silly, but his legs are so strong that he can leg press 3 tons. And it's not just his legs that are strong, his upper half possesses superhuman strength as well. His arms can lift about 1 ton. He also has flexible bone structure, regenerative healing factor, infrared vision, and the best part, his 30-foot long tongue can also act as a whip. And it can secrete venom that can give him mind control over your body, and his saliva is acid as well. Number 5, Wither. Making his first appearance in New Mutants Volume 2, Issue 3, Kevin Ford grew up thinking that he was cursed, or he was the most unlucky person ever, one or the two. See, his mutant power started manifesting, and then he noticed it first in his plants, and then he noticed it in his clothes, and then he noticed it in people. So what would happen is his plants would wither. They would wither and they would die. And then his clothes were starting to decay as well. So once his father figures out this mutation, he tries to calm him down, but coming into contact with him, obviously the inevitable happens. He sees the world in this lifeless or decaying way now. See, it's part of this mutation. He can disintegrate all forms of organic matter just by one touch. Whatever he touches withers, so now we get his name. It turns into dust within seconds, whatever it is. Now this seems boring, I guess. When you think of it in like a cinematic battle, it's not too exciting. But this guy can take out an entire elite squad just by touching them. I mean, realistically, just send him in always. No one's gonna expect it. All you have to do is get him to fist bump everybody and then bam, just like that. No more bad guys. Number 4, Nocturne. This next one, she comes from Earth 2182, where she's the daughter of Nightcrawler and Scarlet Witch. Now, she's got her dad's looks, unfortunately. She's blue, furry, she's got 3 fingers and 3 toes. She's got a tail and yellow eyes and pointed ears. Now, sure, she looks like she can take out any bad guy, like she looks like an alien. So she possesses the powers of both of her parents. She can blast off energy bolts, she can climb walls, but what makes her even more powerful is that she has the ability to possess others for 12 hours, or 1 lunar cycle. But once that timer is up, the victim is just completely out of it for 24 hours, just comatose. This super offspring packs a super punch, that's for sure. Number 3, Tattoo. Christine Cord made her comic book debut in the New X-Men issue 126. She was a student of the Xavier Institute, and she's known as Tattoo, well, because her mutation allows her to display messages or designs on her skin, and she can phase through matter, which is also kind of fun. She's pretty awesome. I mean, when you first think of her, you may just think of the skin messages and be like, oh, whatever. Maybe she's a spy. Maybe she can be like, send help and then use her skin. Cool, that's good. But check this out. Tattoo actually phased her hand into Cyclops' head once and told him that if she becomes solid, he would not survive to see the end of it. How awesome is that? But she sadly lost her powers during the events of M-Day, but if you ever ran into Christine again, she would probably surprise you with her new ability. When she was released from jail, she joined the New Warriors and was given her own Stiltman armor, becoming Longstrike. So bam! 2 in 1. Talk about underrated. Number 2, Banshee. The Screaming Banshee. Okay, he made his first appearance in X-Men issue 28. Sean Cassidy was born as the heir to the castle and estate of Cassidy Keep, Ireland. Now, Professor Xavier asked him to join the X-Men at the same time as Thunderbird, and they both stayed as members of the new X-Men. Now, he went on to train the new generation of X-Men and Generation X, but he sadly lost his life during Deadly Genesis, when he was trying to stop Blackbird from crashing when it was taken over. So when you think of an X-Men who screams so loud he can hurt people, it's impressive on its own, sure, but his screams are actually stronger than we really think. His screams can actually break through an inch of steel. And with these wings that Professor X developed for him, he's able to harness this power and use his screams as energy to help him fly. So he can do so much more with his voice as well. He can tighten the sound waves around himself to make a sonic shield, and he can influence your subconscious by changing the tones and vibrations of his voice. He can literally change your mind. How awesome is that? What do you mean you want a divorce? And finally, number 1, we have my favorite on the list, Bailey Hoskins. Okay, I have to talk about this poor kid. Okay, strongest X-Men you wouldn't expect? Yeah, that is for sure Bailey Hoskins. The only appearance of this kid is in the 2016 miniseries X-Men Worst X-Man Ever, which is a pretty cruel name. He was a student at Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters, and his power is pretty spectacular. He can self-detonate, he can make himself explode, and you would never expect it just by looking at him. I mean, come on. He reminds me of Hogarth from the Iron Giant. He's such a cute kid.
At number 10 is Bishop. Lucas Bishop is a mutant from the far-flung dystopian possible future where Hope Summers wiped out millions of human beings, resulting in the hunting and policing of mutants by Sentinels under control of the government. From just this alone, his knowledge of possible future events, he has a large amount to offer. But Lucas Bishop also served as a member of the XSE mutant police force, giving him a whole whack of experience using his abilities. Speaking of which, Bishop has the very useful mutant ability of energy absorption, allowing him to absorb the majority of types of energy, including magic, sound, light, psionic, psychic, and the list goes on, with no clearly defined limit as of yet. The energies he absorbs can be either environmental or directed towards him as attacks. He can then store or project that energy from his body in different ways, whether in the form of concussive blasts, energy rays, explosions, fire, plasma, and again the list goes on. But his favorite use is by projecting the energy out of his XSE weaponry. The nature of his powers makes it difficult to damage him with energy-based attacks, and almost any attack to be honest, giving him nigh invulnerability. But it also enables him to work well with any energy-using teammates. Bishop can also store the absorbed energy within his personal reserves, whereupon the energy increases his strength, speed, stamina, and healing abilities. He is highly underutilized, especially recently, and I think that's gotta change. Alright, at number 9 is Polaris. Lorna Dane is not just a green Scarlet Witch, okay? In fact, she is the real, legit daughter of the anti-hero magnetic powerhouse Magneto. She's been manipulated, used, and been the victim of villains like Mesmero, Eric the Red, the Marauders, Zaladane, and Apocalypse. But she has been a member of the X-Men and more recently is a key member of the newest version of the team. She's always been prominent, but I think a little overlooked in comparison to others, which is a shame. She's actually quite powerful. As the daughter of Magneto, Polaris actually has pretty much exactly the same abilities as him. She can control and manipulate magnetic fields, allowing her to create force fields, fly on the Earth's magnetic field, emit magnetic concussive pulses that can overload and short-circuit electrical systems. She's able to manipulate the natural iron within the blood of living organisms, allowing her to reverse the flow of an entire crowd's blood in order to render them unconscious. She controls metal and magnetism just like her father, but hasn't had as much experience, so her potential has not been fully realized as of yet. Number 8. Forge. Forge has been an important member of the X-Men and mutant community for a long time. But for some reason, he always seems kind of unused, at least to me. He is almost like the X-Men's version of Q from James Bond. His mutant ability is that he is an intuitive genius. He can visually perceive mechanical energy, quote unquote, in action. He can just understand how something works by looking at it, as easily as breathing, for example. This power allows Forge to instinctively know and understand the potential and functional operations of any machine or technological device in his visual range. It's a skill that, combined with his natural intelligence, allows him to conceive, design, and build mechanical devices and operate, modify, and disassemble existing technology to create countermeasures for it. It's pretty cool. It's almost hard to explain how this is a power, but it is. It's allowed him to subconsciously invent and construct something where someone else would have to think about it, design it, and then create it. He's been able to just do it, and then deconstruct it later to figure out how it actually works. He's created cybernetic systems, sophisticated holograms, and elaborate computer and fiber optic systems, as well as time travel devices. His potential is vast, and that's before you take into account his magical affinity. And at number 7 is Dazzler. Dazzler, otherwise known as Alison Blair, is a mutant with the ability to transduce sound into light. She's also a very gifted singer and performer, which she uses in tandem with her powers to just blow people's minds at her concerts. But she is more than that. She can take any source of sound other than her own voice, unless it's projected back at her, as light energy which she stores up and can use in a bunch of really cool ways. Obviously, using the lights she emits, she can blind adversaries, but she can also create therapeutic light to help allies. Her Dazzle Blast, which is either the worst name ever or the best name ever, is a light show so intense it overwhelms the nervous system of whoever is watching and can knock people out. She can also shoot lasers that can cut through solid metal and photon blasts that strike with concussive force. She can create quote-unquote light fog to hide allies. She can create force fields for offensive and defensive purposes, and she can even fly. She's become the Herald of Galactus in a What If comic, and she was actually one of the more impressive versions of Thor from God Doom's Thor Corps, even coming over to the 616 reality at one point. Dazzler is awesome and very underused. Coming in at number 6 is Mimic. As a child, a nosy and curious Calvin Rankin accidentally exposed himself to one of his father's experiments. Altering his body and triggering his powers, Calvin soon discovered he was able to mimic the abilities of others who were in his close proximity. He first appeared as an adversary to the original X-Men, copying and mimicking all their powers at once. After he reformed, he was offered a role on the team. Now, as a member of the X-Men, Mimic didn't really get along too well with his fellow teammates, but he was one hell of a powerful asset to them and was responsible for a few of the team's victories. Cyclops resigned as leader shortly after Calvin joined, and weirdly, Professor X chose to make Mimic the team's leader. Over time, other powers he has copied include the powers of Hulk, Banshee, Marrow, Gambit, Rogue, Storm, Colossus, Nightcrawler, Shadowcat, Pharaon, Megan, Kylan, Micromax, Rachel Summers, Wolfsbane, Pete Wisdom, Psylocke, Risque, Siren, Warpath, Sunspot, Cable, Caliban, Domino, Boom Boom, Richter, Cannonball, Shatterstar, Post, Blob, Mystique, Toad, members of the Crazy Gang, and so many others. The thing about Mimic in comparison to Sync or Rogue is that he copies skills and abilities as well as powers, and even mimics physical attributes, which gives him a degree of more versatility at the cost of lower power levels. But he's still really cool. Number 5, Multiple Man. Multiple Man has such a crazy interesting power. Okay, so I should say for starters that he isn't technically a mutant. Jamie or James Madrox is actually a changeling, which is a sort of genetic precursor for mutants who gain their abilities at birth instead of having their X gene activated later on, like in puberty or whatever. For James, his power is that of duplication. He can duplicate himself multiple times upon impact, and each of his dupes can create one single dupe. One of the real benefits of his power though is that the Prime Madrox will retain any memories of his dupe's experiences. So let's say you had to read like 10 books in a week. Well, you could have like 10 dupes all read one book each, and then when they re-merge with you, you have all of their memories of each book, if that makes sense. Multiple Man is like an information gathering powerhouse. He can also use the ability to learn skills, like one of his dupes trained as a Shaolin monk and trained in meditation. One was a trained EMT, one audited an anatomy class for 6 months, one passed the New York bar exam, one claimed to be the world's greatest detective, and just stuff like that. In his self-titled comic from 2018, he even goes into a future world that is completely ruled by Magi, which is the plural for Jamie's dupes. I'd love to see his potential shown in the MCU or something, it would just be so entertaining. And at number 4, Blink. Do you know in the beginning of the X-Men Days of Future Past live action movie when there's that really cool fight scene in the bunker between some mutants and the ultra advanced Sentinels? Now you know that mutant that was firing out portals and stuff and doing all that jazz? That is Blink, and she is so cool. Clarice Ferguson's power has a few different uses. Obviously there are the bright pink portals, but she can also throw that same energy as a sort of missile that will teleport those, or even parts of those, that she hits. The range of her power is actually quite impressive, as it has a potential range of as far as the moon and back, which is pretty freaking far, if you know. With the potential of her abilities and the cool way it is used and even just how awesome it looks, you'd think she would have done a lot more, but she seems to not really have a whole lot of meaningful appearances. Except, if you want to see her being as amazing of a character as she should be, find her in Age of Apocalypse. So cool. Number 3, Firestar. Another pretty powerful mutant who just hasn't had any key moments to speak of. Angelica Jones, also known as Firestar, has the awesome mutant ability of microwave energy manipulation and generation. She uses the Earth's electromagnetic field and converts it into microwave radiation. She also absorbs microwave radiation from her environment and from stars in the galaxy. She can then focus this energy at targets or to do different things. She can set targets on fire, explode them, and even melt them. She is consistently keeping her powers in check because she has the potential to damage the entire Earth and its atmosphere with her abilities, which is why she is even more powerful in space, where she isn't limited by the fragility of the Earth. Out in the cosmos, she has been able to easily produce an attack that injured Garthon Sol when he possessed the energy of the entire Nova Corps. And she also used her abilities to power a massive Shi'ar interstellar transport gate with very little effort. She's even been able to disrupt the psionic powers of others using her own power. Most impressively, Emma Frost. She is still young and learning to use her powers, but she needs to be more than just one of Spider-Man's friends because she is a powerhouse of potential. And at number 2 is Husk. Paige Guthrie is part of a family that has a lineage of mutant abilities. Sam Guthrie, Cannonball, Joshua Guthrie, Icarus, Melody Guthrie, Arrow, and Jebediah Guthrie, who doesn't have a superhero name. Paige's power is a wee bit unorthodox though. She has the ability to shed her skin, and by concentrating on specific chemicals or elemental formulas, she can cause the layer of skin underneath to be a different element or shape or state. She can become any solid that she has studied and can imitate metal, diamond, granite, wood, rubber, and even glass. She's been shown to turn into a sharp-toothed lizard once, which is weird. She doesn't have perfect control over her abilities at this point in time, but when she transforms, she obviously gains different abilities depending on what she turns into. She's granted herself super strength and durability, flame generation, and many other different things. Her shedding lets her get rid of dirt or sweat and even minor injuries, which is both cool and kind of a little freaky, but she has all kinds of potential if she is given the time to properly train her powers. And in at number 1, Megan or Megan or however you want to say it. If you were a fan of Excalibur in the late 80s and early 90s, then you'll likely know who Megan is. That's with 2 G's. Megan is a unique character like most of the mutants are. She's a mutant empath with the ability to shapeshift, but she is also an elemental of great power, and she's even got a dose of fairy heritage. Her list of abilities is a little hard to define, as it is with most shapeshifters, and it can even be augmented by her connection with the Earth. She is transformed into a Godzilla-like dragon that could breathe fire, and even a werewolf-like creature with all the enhancements that can afford. Megan has also shown through her environmental connection and mutant empath abilities to be able to adapt to situations and also to the emotions of those around her. So for example, she can grow gills and fur, or become prettier when those around her think she is ugly. She can also turn into other superhumans as well, gaining their powers but with less potential, which even worked when she became a female version of the Silver Surfer, which is kind of nuts. She is resistant to reality warping powers, and she even has a true form where she can manipulate elements, fly, and manipulate magical energies. She is a highly capable mutant and character. She just hasn't really done a heck of a lot since the 90s, and that's a shame.
Kicking off the list at number 10, M. Monet St. Croix made her first appearance in Generation X issue 1 as Penance, and by the time issue 40 rolled around, she was introduced as Monet. She was the second child of Ambassador Cartier St. Croix, who was a wealthy former president of numerous corporations. Now, although she had an older brother and 2 young twin sisters, her father still favored her. Now, her brother Marius had mutant abilities, and when they manifested, he became evil, sadly. He actually took out his mother and was kicked out of the family, and then he asked Monet to join him, traveling through other dimensions, gaining power. She was like, nope, I'm good, thanks. So she rejected him, and Marius trapped her in this form of a mute creature with diamond-hard red skin. And he fed on her powers. What a not nice guy. It's awful. So Claudia and Nicole, her sisters, the twins, they joined forces. Like, literally. They merged into a new version of Monet. And it was all pretty much the same. Personality, appearance, and powers. M is a telepathic genius, and of course super strength and super speed sure does help her get the job done. Before we continue on with this list, guys, if you want to go ahead and give us a thumbs up, that would be great. It does help our channel quite a bit. You guys are the best. Thank you so much for watching. Let's go right back into this list. I don't want to waste any more time. Number 9, Frenzy. Okay, Joanna Cargill. She made her first debut in X Factor issue 4. Now, she accidentally punched her father so hard that her hand went through his chestal plate, which is just a great way to find out you have powers. Now, her father was in no means a good person at all, but still, finding out you're a mutant in that way is pretty rough. That's pretty traumatizing for a young kid. So she became known as Frenzy, and she joined the Allegiance of Evil. Now, after the Acolytes disbanded, Joanna became ambassador for Genosha and stood by Magneto until she was captured by the US government in order to learn more about Magneto, but she didn't talk. She was a tough one. She didn't talk until Jean Grey entered and freed her, giving her the option to join the X-Men the easy way or the hard way. Jean used the hard way, and then Frenzy's entire attitude was changed. Her personality was like campy, it was awkward, not nearly as confident as before, but her powers were still there. She did help the X-Men find Magneto's base. She was a team member, even if it was forced and campy. So after Magneto's defeat, her mind control was released and she rejoined the Acolytes and then left the X-Mansion. Super speed, super strength, super stamina, super everything, you name it, she's got it. Her body has been described as being hard as steel, making the She-Hulk put up quite a fight. Number 8, Armor. Hisako Ichiki made her first appearance in Astonishing X-Men Volume 3, Issue 4. Now, she grew up in Japan before joining the Xavier Institute. She formed a close relationship with Wing and Blindfold once she joined Kitty Pryde's Paladin Squad. Now, her new close friends were being attacked one day by Ord of Breakworld, so Armor used her unique mutant abilities to take care of him with a mighty punch. She can create the psionic exoskeleton suit of armor, hence the name Armor. It's fueled by the energy of Hisako's ancestors. In the Ultimate Universe, her abilities create quite the spectacle as well. They appear in the shape of these massive animals, these great beasts, even dragons at some point. As if these abilities weren't surprising and fantastic enough, she also received combat training from Wolverine and tactic training from Cyclops. So she's kind of a big deal. Number 7, Vulcan. He named himself after the Roman god of fire, but Vulcan's real identity was that of Gabriel Summers. He was born after Cyclops and Havoc. Well, not really. He wasn't really born. He was actually surgically removed from his mother's body and placed in an incubator accelerator, then aged to be at his prime, and then sent to Earth to work for Dak and Shikari. One of those normal childhoods, you know? So he escaped and he was found by Moira McTaggart with no memories of who he is or where he came from. Poor kid. So he asked for Charles' help, and then all Kid Vulcan wanted to do was learn about his mutant abilities. Sounds like the perfect student. Like, come on, you're doing all the right things. Charles needed help from him and other newcomers to find the remaining X-Men. So Charles put him in this danger room as a training exercise to get them sharp in a short amount of real time. So it felt like months of training, but in fact it's only a few hours. And then Vulcan and this new team were sent to Krakoa to rescue the original X-Men. But Vulcan revealed to Scott that Xavier sacrificed his own brother to save him. Number 6, Maggot. That's a fun name right off the bat. Maggot. Maggot, or I mean Japheth, first appeared in Uncanny X-Men issue 345. He was born with 5 siblings but never grew at the same rate as them. And on top of that, he had struggled with pains in his stomach. Sadly, those pains turned out to maybe be cancer, and he feared that he would run his family dry with medical bills. So at just age 12, he left the South African village and started to think of a dark solution to his problem. Super tragic. So he ended up in the Kalahari Desert and was found by Magneto, who figured out that these stomach issues were actually these 2 slug-like creatures that lived in the boy's body, and they acted as his digestive system. Years later, Maggot reached out to Magneto in hopes that he would help him with this gross situation. Now the slugs, named Eenie and Meanie, because that's what you do when you have slugs, you give them cute nicknames, they were these sentient techno-organic slugs that could devour anything. Doesn't matter what kind of matter you are, gone, devoured. They would do it fast too, not at the pace of normal slugs. And once lunchtime was finished, they would return back to Japheth's stomach, transferring the energy from what they just consumed, granting him super strength and durability. Also, he had a nice avatar tan to go along with these magnificent abilities. Number 5, Kid Omega. Now again, the word kid is used lightly in this list. You do not want to underestimate Quentin Quire, aka Kid Omega. He made his first appearance in X-Men issue 134. He's been described as one of the most powerful telepaths next to Jean Grey. So off the bat, you know you're in for a treat. He was one of Xavier's prized pupils. That is until, of course, he put together the Omega Gang, which was this gang that would handle humans after they've committed crimes against mutants. They would do it themselves, not in a poetic way, to say the least. They were like the super kid police. They even went to a tattoo shop and made it official. They got these Omega symbols tattooed over top of the X. Now his abilities are insane. He can manipulate your perception, judgment, wills, and common sense. He's able to track you down by listening to your thoughts, folks. Your thoughts, he can hear your thoughts. And even in this instance, if you were a telepath, you wouldn't see him coming because he would block out your powers to sneak up on you. One of the coolest things about Quentin is the psionic shotgun that he can create. It just looks cool. He just channels all this mental energy as this astral energy shotgun. And if that doesn't do the trick, the psionic rocket launcher should. Number 4, Kubark, aka Kid Gladiator, another kid. Kubark is the son of Emperor Gladiator. He was this young prince sent to Earth to train and discover more secrets about his powers. And the one place you go and do that is, of course, the Jean Grey School for Higher Learning. Warbird was his bodyguard, and the reason that he was sent to Earth, this new kid on the block, was because he destroyed more than half of the Shi'ar royal city on Chandalar. Just for fun, you know? In Wolverine and the X-Men, he arrives and starts giving orders to other students, like to bring him snacks, the whole thing. And he wanted these students to call him their new Imperial Overlord. He's jam-packed with superpowers though. He can possess the ability to fly, and his eyes are pretty interesting, not just to look at. He has microscopic vision and can blast heat beams through those peepers. And with an incredible lung capacity, he can take in large amounts of air and blast it out, creating these hurricane-like winds. And if that doesn't work, he can use his breath to freeze you dead in your tracks. Number 3, Lifeguard, aka Heather Cameron. Lifeguard is such a cool character. Okay, let's talk about her. She's super unique. She made her first debut in Extreme X-Men issue 6. And judging by her name, yes, she of course started off as a lifeguard and also as a surfer. Her mutant ability is that of a lifeguard. Literally, her powers allow her to manifest whatever is needed to save the life of somebody near her. If you're allergic to peanuts, bam, EpiPen, stab, we're good. She's like the super medic of the X-Men. She's awesome. After the events of M-Day, Heather was one of the lucky to retain her abilities. She's almost a combination of Darwin and Mystique. Now, I talked about Darwin in part 1 of this list, so if you want a little bit of catching up to do, you know where to find that. Number 2, Zeitgeist. Axel Clooney. He was seen in Deadpool 2, and he made his first comic book appearance in X-Force issue 116. His ability, let's just talk about it. He can spit acid, like a lot of acid. So much acid. It can eat through any substance, and I think what makes this character even more wild is when he himself discovered these powers for the first time. Oh boy, okay. He was at the beach hanging out. He met this lovely woman. They clicked. It was romantic. They were nice. They were kissing on the beach. And then all of a sudden, this happens. A lot of acid puke. A lot of puke. Real nasty stuff. Ugh. But this guy is super powerful. Like, he can take on so many mutants. I mean, it's gross, but if only he didn't spew it out of his mouth, maybe he had fingers that could do the acid shooting, he would be less of a gag. Pun intended. And finally, coming in at number 1, Jubilee. Making her first appearance in Uncanny X-Men issue 244, Jubilee, aka Jubilation Lee, first discovered her mutant power of generating these dazzling sparkles from her hands. She was always seen as this little sister type character from the start, but she packs a powerful, pretty punch. She was discovered by Dazzler, Cyclops, Rogue, and Storm during a rescue at the mall, and when she followed the women back through a portal, she ended up at the X-Men's temporary base in the Australian outback. Jubilee and Wolverine ended up becoming a good pair, working missions together, and they were a fun duo. Now her powers grew to a whole new level when a vampire ended up infecting the area of Union Square. This happens in Curse of the Mutants, and Jubilee, being caught in the path of this infection, ended up becoming a vampire. It was a pretty big deal. Even before the vampire stuff, this is a highly underrated character to this day.
Coming in at number 10, it's Toad. Toad has been a member of the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, and by extension, a part of the mutant community for a hot minute. But in my opinion, Mortimer Toynbee hasn't really been utilized as much as he should be given his massive list of abilities. Toad has a degree of superhuman strength, specifically in his back and legs, which allow the little weirdo to jump around 25 to 37 feet, and he'll kick you so hard you ain't getting back up. He's got flexible bone structure, superhuman stamina, durability, reflexes, and agility. Toad, like a lot of super beings, has a regenerative healing factor, but unlike a lot of mutants, he has UV vision, a super strong 30-foot prehensile tongue, acidic saliva, sticky paralytical resin out of his pores, and pheromone secretion. I can understand why he isn't exactly at the top of the mutant landscape, partially because he's kind of really gross, and just overall impressive. unpleasant, but he does have a hell of a lot of abilities to offer. Number 9, Ricochet. Now, I don't know if this is cheating, because you slap some web shooter, super strength, and the ability to do everything a spider can on this mutant, and you basically have Spider-Man. In fact, the superhero name and costume used by Jonathan Gallo was originally used by Peter Parker as a secondary superhero identity when Spider-Man was framed for ending someone's life. But enough about Webhead. Jonathan Gallo is a mutant with the abilities of superhuman agility and reflexes, with his agility allowing him to jump long distances, and when he combines his powers, he can almost bounce off walls in a sort of, I don't know, ricocheting type movement? But that's not all. Ricochet also has another mutation in the form of his Danger Sense, which is totally not the same as Spider Sense, except it sort of is. It allows Jonathan to sense danger before it happens. Now with his agility, reflexes, and Danger Sense, this mutant possesses 3 of Spider-Man's more useful abilities, but he's just different and cool enough that I can still respect him as more than some cheap knockoff. Number 8, Lifeguard. Lifeguard, or Heather Cameron, arguably has one of the most useful mutant powers possible. Her ability is called Danger Detection Response, and basically what it means is that she can detect danger to her or others' lives in her vicinity, and she can literally evolve whatever powers are necessary for her to stop those lives from being lost. She can gain more than one power at a time and is able to control said powers after just a few seconds. It also seems to be kind of limitless in what she can do. Her situation biomorphic adaptations have taken the form of growing wings for flight, extra arms for carrying and super strength, her skin turning into a sort of golden metallic super awesome armor, gills for underwater breathing with her legs even turning into a fishtail for better swimming ability, as well as simply upping her strength level from normal to superhuman. It's almost too fitting that she was an actual lifeguard before her powers emerged. She's a literal lifesaver. Number 7, Forearm. Michael McCain is the mutant under the name Forearm, an exceedingly clever name as this mutant's ability is that Forearm has 4 arms. Oh boy. Alongside his 4 arms ability, Forearm also has access to super strength, stamina, and durability. Because honestly, Forearms isn't exactly gonna save him in the majority of mutant conflicts. That being said though, I would kill to have 2 extra arms. I just can't help but imagine how useful that would be. Add to the fact that your arms are super strong, not only can you make a peanut butter jelly sandwich while texting your friends and petting a cat or something, but you can also trade 2 extra fists worth of punches with some heavy hitting mutants who only get 2 hands. For Michael, when his powers are used in unison with his extra limbs, he is a formidable close combat specialist, able to hold his own against some of X-Men's own powerhouses like Rockslide. He was a founding member of the Mutant Liberation Front, and he is now happily living on Krakoa. Number 6, Nature Girl. Although Lin Lee started off at Jean Grey's school for higher learning, after she witnessed some of the horrible things humanity is doing to the earth and to nature, she would instead become an fighting back against humanity, which makes sense given her powers. Nature Girl's powers are directly connected to the natural world, so she can communicate, influence, manipulate, and control nature, living beings, except I guess not humans or mutants, plants, natural phenomena like the weather and geology of the earth, and the matter and energy of which all these things are composed of. Now that statement alone kind of encompasses a lot of different stuff. She can call upon animals and ally herself with them. She can make plants grow, move, and attack people. She can control the weather to a degree and heal nature to a degree too. She was on the run from Wolverine for a while and was able to get away from him a few times using her abilities. And she looks totally awesome wielding the Krakoan cudgel with her big antlers and the goat legs and stuff. Super cool. Number 5, Miranda. The only reason this character is on this list is because a lot of people have not heard of her. She doesn't even have a last name. Miranda had powers that appeared at first to be cosmic level reality warping. Warping on a level the Beast created the term Omicron level mutant to call her. He thought she was able to manipulate reality while somehow completely avoiding any damage to space or time. Like when she has stopped the Juggernaut in his path by making a well appear right below him that he was falling down millions of miles. But what Miranda's mutant power actually was control over all of Marvel's continuity. She is the one who has been keeping all of Marvel's mutants young. She's the reason the old Nick Fury got replaced by Samuel L. Jackson, and she's the reason Bucky Barnes came back as the Winter Soldier soldier. At least, she is in this alternate universe of Earth TRN-656, the one from X-Men Worst X-Man Ever. I'm just kind of curious to see if this ultra powerful mutant will ever show up in other stories or even the 616 universe at all. Number 4, Banshee. Sean Cassidy has been around for one heck of a long time in the world of Marvel's mutant community, and he has done some pretty prominent things, but his power doesn't seem like it's all that impressive, and he is kind of looked over when thinking about the mutants, but he shouldn't be. Sean has acoustic kinesis, an ability he does many cool things with. Primarily, Sean emits a sonic scream. Now the sound waves from this sonic scream have shattered solid objects, cracked skulls, and even liquefied people. But he has done so much more with this ability. He can ride the sound waves he creates using his suit to be able to fly at subsonic speeds. He can create sonar by sending out a pure signal note and listening to the returning sound. He can tighten the sound waves around himself and others to create sonic shields. And more than that though, he has been shown to affect the fluid inside people's ears with his sonic screams, being able to set them off balance and even render them unconscious. One ability that had me raising an eyebrow is the fact that Banshee can even subtly influence people's subconscious mind by changing the tones and vibrations of his voice, effectively using hypersonic suggestions and persuasive abilities. Don't sleep on Banshee, people. Number 3, Northstar. Jean-Paul Beaubier is an interesting mutant with a few different abilities. Northstar's main ability is super speed. Not really in the traditional sense of running really fast though. Northstar can propel his body at superhuman speed, becoming a living projectile, channeling a portion of the kinetic energy of his body's molecules in a single direction. It's even possible for him to reach 99% the speed of light in a vacuum. But if he were to do it on Earth or something, he'd not only damage himself, but could quite possibly break the planet. He can also super speed any part of his body, giving him superhuman reflexes and an incredibly fast metabolism to heal wounds. What's really cool is that since he is taking atomic motion from the muscles, his muscles become closer, making him superhumanly durable, allowing him to survive moving at the speeds he does without tearing himself apart. He also uses his ability to fly by projecting the kinetic energy downwards, which in turn lifts him upwards. Northstar used this ability to basically cheat as an Olympic skier, which is kind of really unfair, but whatever. And we haven't even talked about his photokinesis and concussive blasts yet, and we're not going to, so moving on. Number 2, Sage. Sage is a super genius with a brain more powerful than any computer in the world, granting her perfect memory and rapid analytical abilities. She can come up with the perfect plan in an instant, learn just about any skill without having to practice it, remember everything she's ever experienced, perform multiple tasks at once by allocating a partition of her brain to each task, and, thanks to training with Professor X, she can engage in telepathy. Her telepathic abilities allow her to detect minds and read them, project thoughts, astral projection, cast realistic mental illusions, and she even has a kind of psionic defense unique to her called her firewall. But it doesn't even stop there, as Sage even has some biokinetic abilities as well, including reading another mutant or person's genetic code and DNA, being able to literally see who someone's related to, jump-starting latent or enhancing current mutant abilities, and has complete control over her physical body, being able to expel nanobots from her body by controlling her immune system, almost like highly advanced antivirus. She needs more time in the spotlight, like desperately. And in at number 1 is Negasonic Teenage Warhead. You may remember Ellie Phimister as the super angsty Negasonic Teenage Warhead from the Ryan Reynolds Deadpool movies. And while that character was both hilarious and awesome, she's kind of pretty different in the comics. Obviously, she is still a teenager with that ridiculous yet awesome name, but her powers seem to be vastly different. Ellie's powers are psychically based, and primarily take the form of precognitive nightmares and premonitions, meaning she sees the future. Specifically, she saw disasters before they happened, which kind of explains the heightened teenage angst thing. But she would go on to start having glimpses of danger in the near future, which allows her to plan ahead or avoid attacks. She also possesses other psychic abilities like telepathy, telekinesis, and has been able to levitate. But maybe strongest of all is her abilities of reality warping and particle manipulation and absorption. Plus, some of the superhuman starter pack abilities including strength, speed, durability, and reflexes. As well as just being an awesome character, partially due to her texting movie counterpart.
Kicking off the list at number 10, we have Mimic. Calvin Rankin came into comics in X-Men 19. He was the son of a scientist, and when he was just a child, he knocked over a beaker, filled with this experimental chemicals, okay? Now this red gas emerged and he inhaled it, so now he has this amazing ability where he can mimic anybody else's powers. They just have to be standing close by. Now the team at first is trying to take him down, but they're failing, of course, as he's just adapting to their every move. So while this ability does sound like one of the best, it kind of just depends on who's near you. I mean, he's not too powerful, but he is, if you're the one that's powerful that's near him. See what I mean? So if you're hanging out with Mimic, he may just seem pretty normal. That's because, well, shocker, you're just pretty normal. You can't fly, you can't shoot lasers out of your eyes. But if Cyclops came along, all of a sudden this guy is totally different. You're still a boring human. Now he's another Cyclops. How unfair is that? And before we continue on with this list, guys, if you want to go ahead and give us a thumbs up, that would be awesome. It really does wonders for our channel. You guys are the best. Thank you so much for watching. Now let's get right back into these crazy mutants. Number 9, not another teen mutant. Okay, this next one is a one-off, okay? He doesn't have a name exactly, so we'll just refer to him as Teen Mutant from now on. Not a Teen Mutant Ninja Turtle, just a Teen Mutant. Well, you'll see, it's kind of crazy. At first, he looks like a regular kid. He's got posters on his wall, one of which is Wolverine with the caption, "Be different," right below it, but we'll talk about that a little later, because he may have taken that a little too literally. So he wakes up, he's ready for school, he's looking for breakfast. His mom is nowhere to be seen, only a pile of her clothes remain on the ground. So he doesn't call the police, but rather he just writes a note, sticks it, and then goes to school. If you ever wake up and there's just clothes left, call the police no matter what. That comes first. On the way to school, he sees there's just a collar lying on the sidewalk. Just a collar, no animal. Okay, odd. What's going on? Finally, he sees people. He's like, okay, great. I'm not going crazy. Whew, that was a close one. But I bet that he wished that that was the case after what's about to happen. So he has this neat ability where people just don't survive being close to him. They kind of explode. It's pretty gross. And he hears it from the guy in that poster himself. He hears it from Wolverine when he finds him ducking out in a cave. So what happened was when he hit puberty, he developed a specific mutation that radiates a series of toxins and acid-like poisons. So it wipes out any organic tissue in its way. It turns it into vapor. So the number of people that he ended up taking out that day was a whopping 265. And you thought he was just another blonde-haired teen heartthrob. Think again. Number 8, El Guapo. This next one, I don't think I would even notice this mutant if he was standing right in front of my very eyes. Meet Robbie Rodriguez. He was the stuntman for X-Statix the movie. Now he saved the team from Sharon Ginsburg. She attacked because she blamed X-Statix for the amputation of her wings. So in comes Robbie Rodriguez with his sentient skateboard to save the day. That's right, sentient skateboard, you heard me. He has no real powers himself, but he has this symbiotic skateboard that acts along with his mental commands, even subconscious thoughts sometimes. So the skateboard once beat him up for cheating on his girlfriend. So next time you see a dude at the skate park, just double check and see if it's Robbie Rodriguez, because you never know. Number 7, Anarchist. Tyke Alucard made his first appearance in X-Force issue 116. The same issue that had Zeitgeist origins as well, actually, which is in part 2. If you haven't already seen it, I talk about him. He's the guy who pukes acid. Gross. But we also meet Tyke Alucard in this. So he said he doesn't want to go and give away all his secrets, but he's got something going on with his sweat. It's like acid. He can secrete acid from the pores of his body, and if there's enough of it, say that when he's fighting bad guys, it becomes this form of energy that he's able to blast out. He would blast these acid blasts. Like, how insane is that? The guy makes acid brass knuckles. Brassed knuckles. He was a new addition to the team to replace Sluck, but they weren't a fan of him at first. They thought he was a risk, not a team player, high maintenance, and mentally unstable. Although he pulled through for the team at the end of the day. Number 6, Cypher. Douglas Ramsey came around with comics with New Mutants issue 13. Now he believes that language is power. And when we first meet him, he's a smart dude in a vest. He's got nice hair, he's talking about deciphering codes. We wouldn't expect too much from him. Maybe he's their guy in the chair. Other chair. Now Douglas is actually quite powerful. His ability allows him to communicate with any species. Written or spoken language doesn't make a difference. Doug's got your back, whatever language that is. He can also extend this ability to decipher codes and complex equations, leaving him a pretty powerful asset to any team. Number 5, Eyeboy. Trevor Hawkins, again, one of those mutants where you can probably guess his mutation just on his name alone. Eyeboy is, yes, covered in eyes. 57 of them, to be exact. He made his first appearance in Wolverine and the X-Men issue 19. He was one of the new mutants that manifested their power after the Avengers vs. X-Men war. Then he enrolled in the Jean Grey School for Higher Learning. So Eyeboy, okay, big deal. You walk up, you poke all of his eyes out, problem solved. We've played Zelda before, we know how to defeat this guy. Wrong. He is more than meets the eyes. Trevor can of course see you coming, and though his eyes can't shoot laser beams, they do have a plethora of unique abilities. I'm talking microscopic vision, telescopic vision, X-ray vision, night vision, infrared, thermal, chemical detection, you name it, he can see it. All these eyes will see you in any sense. He can even pick up on your body language quite well. Number 4, Nature Girl. Lin Lee made her debut in Wolverine and the X-Men Volume 2, Issue 1. And at first she seems like a regular student, just maybe with antlers. Okay. So Nature Girl can control and bond with animals, which sounds pretty peaceful if anything. Like if I could control animals, I'd spend all my time in the woods. I'd just take a flute and I'd have a great time. Maybe even pack a lunch. It'd be lovely. With her powers, she can of course do that, but also go further. She can connect to the natural world and control all of nature. Living beings, plants, weather, the very geology of the earth. Whatever the case is, she can control it. She can talk to plant lives as well. So if there's any plants that need some watering in your apartment, she'll let you know. And if Nature Girl needs to make a quick escape and there are no birds around to control, she herself can fly only for a limited time. Number 3, Gold Balls. Fabio Medina made his comic book debut in X-Men Volume 3, but it wasn't until issue 11 that we got to meet Gold Balls. His powers came to be after somebody tried to rob him, then all of a sudden he started to generate these spheres, these gold balls, out of every part of his body. And whenever these bouncy gold balls hit something, they would make a boink sound, which ought to be pretty annoying just as it is. So these gold balls were not made of gold, rather they were produced from infertile eggs. He's pretty outstanding as it is, but currently in the comics, he's referred to as Egg, which is more appropriate after he learned the true nature of his abilities. So Egg and these other members of the Five are tasked with resurrecting any mutants that have met their terrible fate. So eggs are a major key to this process. So he's not just all about, being gold and having balls and stuff. Number 2, Tag. Brian Cruz made his first appearance in New Mutants Volume 2, Issue 10. He was actually reborn thanks to that group of 5 that I just mentioned with gold balls. So Brian's powers are pretty amazing. I can see how one wouldn't expect him to be as powerful as he is. So he has what's called the pariah effect. So if he tags you, hence his name Tag, when he tags you, you become it. Then he uses this form of telepathy to make you emit this signal that causes everybody else to run away from you, just to leave your vicinity. Or they can run towards you, which is even scarier. And he can decide on that number of people affected as well. It could be one person chasing you, or it could be 200, depends how many are near you. This effect stops after the victim reaches 100 feet, but still, that many people in that radius all running towards you, like what if it was Black Friday? It would be an absolute nightmare. Also, these people that are chasing you are fully aware of what's happening, they just can't control it, so if that's not a nightmare, I don't know what is. And finally, number 1, we have Summoner. Making his first appearance in X-Men Volume 5, Issue 2, the Summoner. The Summoner at first just looks like a mutant child. It's referring to its mother, so off the bat you assume, okay, young. He's the son of Bracken and Apocalypse's first horseman of war. He was born 300 years ago on Araco, the highest ranking out of all the other summoners. They were these wizards that can summon creatures of Araco. Now his grandmother was taken out by the dark god of Amenth, Annihilation. So that's when the Amenthi Daemons destroyed Araco's towers and then attacked and wiped out all those mutants. Now the Summoner is not just a pale child, he can summon a horde of elementals as well.
And at number 10 is Beltane. Beltane is a mutant you may likely not have heard of. Her real name is currently unknown, but we know she was part of a group of Romani gypsies. She was captured by the Latvarian monarch and awesome supervillain Dr. Doom and experimented on, which activated her latent mutant abilities, and also set off her desire to overthrow his rule with a group of other escapees. Now Beltane's ability is the secret weapon of her group. She has the ability of fear projection, which means that she can physically project a manifestation of whatever the person she is facing most fears, psychically messing with and almost torturing her victims. So when fighting Wolfsbane, for example, Beltane made the hero see a projection of her not so nice father. Probably a mistake, as Wolfsbane eventually took her down in an animalistic rage, but hey, it's still a cool power. Coming in at number 9, Wolfsbane. Speaking of Wolfsbane, Rain Sinclair has the mutant ability that I wish I had when I was a kid. She can turn herself into a wolf at will and can even go into a transitional form that is basically a close to a werewolf without being a werewolf type of thing. In fact, she is basically a werewolf, but with none of the drawbacks of the monster. She retains all her faculties, minus not being able to talk and just being a little bit feral, and is not forced to change only at night. Rain grows much larger than her human form when she changes and gains access to some enhanced strength, which, coupled with the body of a wolf, grants her enhanced speed and reflexes as well. She gains heightened senses similar to a wolf. The thing with Wolfsbane is that she is both a wolf and a human, so she gains the benefits of both, like almost stacking on top of each other. Unlike wolves, or humans for that matter though, she does have an enhanced healing factor and enhanced vision as well, so double thumbs up. Number 8. Abigail Brand. Abigail here is an interesting character. She is technically a human-alien hybrid, as her father hails from the planet Axis, but it's actually her human mother who Brand inherited her mutant abilities from, that allowed her to join S.H.I.E.L.D. and then SWORD as an agent and hero. So what are said abilities? Well, she has a form of pyrokinesis known as tactile pyrokinesis, which means that Brand can coat at least her hands in flames that are potent enough to burn through most metals via tactile contact. She can use her abilities to warm up others, but has enough control that she can also set others on fire. So she has some versatility with said abilities. I somewhat kind of prefer her form of pyrokinesis because, I don't know, I just swear there are way too many fire-based heroes who seem to all do similar things. So at least Abigail has her own brand of fire. Sorry, the dad jokes are in full force today. Number 7. Primal. Adam Berman first appeared in X-Men Unlimited number 16 in July 1997, and his story arc was one I actually had a good time reading. It was oddly unique, at least to me. Adam is a mutant, but his ability is a transformative one, and he can easily hide it, which allowed him to kind of play himself off as a non-mutant even though he was trying to join the Xavier Institute. That's what I gathered at least. It was kind of confusing. So you should read his story, but we are here for his abilities, not his story. And those said abilities almost remind me of other superpowered beings like the Hulk and even the Lizard, because Adam can transform into a totally primal reptilian-like form, growing about 50% bigger than his normal self and gaining red glowing eyes. But his physical enhancements are quite impressive. His strength boosts to around a level 10, with the highest level being a 100. But level 1 super strength is capable of pressing 800 pounds through a 25-ton range, so level 10 is nothing to scoff at. Look, just go read his story, okay? Number 6. Adam X. Another Adam! Almost like I liked that name or something. Adam Nuramani is honestly a bit more interesting than the last Adam though. He was a genetically created hybrid of both Emperor Deken of the Shi'ar Empire and Catherine Summers of Earth, created in an attempt to introduce more genealogies to the Shi'ar Empire. Now just as his origin is unique, so are his powers. Adam has the ability of electrokinetic hemopyrokinesis, or if you don't want to hurt yourself like I just did, you can also say sanguine combustion, which also sounds super cool. It basically means that he can send an electric surge through oxygenated blood, which leads to ignition of the electrolytes present in said blood, causing a person to burn from the inside out, which could result in a little subtle warming effect, or it could completely disintegrate a person. So there's a lot of wiggle room here, which is cool. But thanks to his Shi'ar side of things, he also has enhanced strength, agility, reflexes, stamina, speed, vision, and healing. So couple all that with his awesome fighting skills and the cool cybernetic retractable claws, and Extreme is someone you don't want to mess with. Coming in at number 5 is Shatterstar. So I was like this close to including Longshot on this list, but he doesn't even consider himself a mutant, and there's a whole bunch of weird time mojo verse stuff going on, so instead I'm going to do his father and or son, which is a whole other thing in itself. Look, all you need to know is we're talking about Shatterstar. Gavidra 7 learned the arts of battle as a warrior in arenas on Mojo World, where he developed both a sense of honor and incredible fighting skill, but those aren't his abilities. He possesses a large superhero starter pack: superhuman strength, speed, agility, stamina, durability, senses, reflexes, agility, dexterity, coordination, balance, plus a regenerative healing factor and even enhanced learning ability. Curiously though, he actually has hollow bones, which makes him a shim lighter than you would think he is, but also further boosts up his natural physical skills. The cool part of Shatterstar though are his Mojoverse swords, which he can use through his mutant ability to channel powerful powerful vibratory shockwaves, which can be absolutely devastating but also kind of drains him of energy. But after his mojo time, he can now create X-shaped portals as well that have to be linked to another person who acts as an anchor for said portals. These also drain him of energy, and he has a cooldown of about like 4 days before he can do it again, because this powerhouse needs some kind of balancing. Number 4, Aurora. In the last part of this series, we talked about North Star, but that mutant has a sister, and guess what? Surprisingly, the mutant gene runs in the family. That shouldn't be surprising really, because genes and all that. Wow, this is a horrible intro. Janine Marie Beaubier, otherwise known as Aurora, can generate a bright light, which according to the wiki is equivalent to 500,000 foot candles. Or if you aren't weird, it's about as strong as a lighthouse light, which is also an extremely weird frame of reference, but I digress. She and her brother can both do this by varying the rate of acceleration of the molecules of their bodies out of phase with one another, thereby generating a cascade of photonic discharges. The light can actually do some interesting things, like she can make a calming light that can even interrupt psychic control, or she can make concussive light blasts. Or, which is even cooler, she can even create lightning blasts that actually do some considerable damage. Like her brother, she can also move incredibly fast, and thanks to her molecular manipulation, she can also be extremely durable, heal quickly, and even withstand all the g-force of moving so fast without doing those insane weird breathing exercises that pilots have to do. Number 3, Phantom X. I honestly kinda dread talking about Phantom X, but I also completely love this guy. When I first read a comic with him in it, I did not fully understand his power, and I still don't really, so now I'm gonna try and explain something to you that I do not fully understand myself. Cool? Cool. So basically, Phantom X, or Charlie Cluster 7, or Weapon 13, or Jean-Philippe, if that's what you want to call him, was experimented on by Weapon Plus and was genetically grown and evolved using Sentinel technology. Thanks to this, he actually has, or had, 3 brains for independent parallel processing, nanoactive blood, and his primary nervous system is actually a detachable techno-organism called EVA, or EVA. So there's some stuff to unpack there. EVA, or EVA, can fly herself and can generate bioelectric charges to be used as weapons, with Phantom X being both telepathically and symbiotically linked to Eva. His multiple brains allow him to think like a sort of supercomputer similar to Sage, but it also gives him access to 2 extra personalities, a charmer and a super deadly mutant hunter. He can create extremely powerful illusions and can enter a trance state where he can rapidly heal, and his self-supremacy over his body and mind allows him to overcome pretty much anything to complete his mission, including mind control. I can't talk too much more about him without taking forever, but know that he has enhanced senses, is a dope fighter, and does not create any kind of smell. Please look into this character and try to make sense of him, because I need help. Number 2, Somnus. Carl Valentino is actually a new member of Earth's Mutants, first appearing in Marvel's Voices Pride #1 in June 2021. But canonically, he's been around for a while. He and Dakin actually had a one-night stand in 1967, a one-night stand in which Dakin dreamt of them having an entire life together, which caused Dakin to retrieve Carl's body in the modern day and bring it to Krakoa for revival. Except this dream was caused by Carl himself. That's because Somnus has the mutant power of Wonneromancy, which I'm almost certain I mispronounced, but I'm kind of proud of myself that I think I didn't. This means he has the ability to enter, broadcast, and even control dreams at will. He can render his opponents unconscious and is also able to bring others into his dreamscape. It's such a unique and interesting power, and it can allow him to live entire lifetimes within a dream, which in my nerd mind tells me he can learn and improve upon skills while dreaming, but don't take my word on that, I just kinda made that up. Only time will tell the multitude of ways his power shall be used in the future. And finally, at number 1 is WizKid. A computer genius and novice inventor, Takashi Taki Matsuya kind of has an unfair advantage in the inventor game. That's because WizKid here has the ability to technoform materials and rearrange parts of things to function to his specifications, even to the point of being contrary to the laws of nature and science. And he's even recently learned how to manipulate plants and even other mutant powers to create new technology. With this ability comes a natural psionic aptitude for seeing how components can work together, which lets him make things work even better using his mutant power. As for the using of other mutant abilities, it basically means he can see the use of individual mutant powers as components, coming together as a larger machine, or even being able to guide the linking and combination of mutant powers to work collaboratively together. So he's almost like a power strategist, which is really cool, on top of the awesome technology he can already create. All this basically comes together to make WizKid someone you would absolutely want on your side, wheelchair and all.
Number 10. Crusader. Crusader is the daughter of X-Men team member Rogue and Avenger Captain America. I know, a weird combination. But in the reality of Earth 9811, these two ended up together after the heroes and villains on Battleworld decided to call a truce. Remaining there, they settled down and raised families, putting their differences aside. I'm not sure how their relationship worked, with Rogue not really being able to touch people and all at this point, or how she had a child considering that, but perhaps, like on Earth 616, she eventually was able to work through the trauma causing this side effect of her powers. Or perhaps the Captain America of Earth 9811 was immune to her involuntary energy and power draining effects. Either way, Sarah is their daughter. She gets much of her power from her mother, or rather she gets much of her power from the power her mother had absorbed in her day, meaning that Sarah is super strong, durable, and can fly. She is also considered worthy enough to lift Thor's hammer and wields her father's shield. Number 9. Wolverine. I really wanted to put Laura Kinney higher up on this list because, well, I love her so much, but unfortunately the psionics are just always pushing some of my favorite and most powerful characters further down on these lists. Those psionics. Oh well. Laura Kinney as X-23 and now Wolverine is still one of the most powerful children of the X-Men around. Some argue that she is more clone, while others argue that she is more biological offspring of Logan, but in reality, she's kind of a bit of both. She was created as a female clone of Wolverine after his genetic material was combined with that of her creator, scientist Sarah Kinney. Sarah noticed that there were damage spots basically in the samples of Logan's genetic material that they had, which was why their cloning process had been unsuccessful up to this point. And so she used her own genetic material to patch those rough spots, which made Laura a female clone. Sarah was forced to carry Laura to term as a surrogate by her jealous colleague Xander Rice, as punishment for even creating the female clone to begin with, a strategy that admittedly had not been approved. Laura has powers similar to her father. She has a regenerative healing factor and was also trained from birth to be a skilled fighter, bodyguard, and assassin. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want to learn about more children of the X-Men, there are a lot out there in the multiverse. Be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Number 8. Chimera. Chimera is the daughter of Storm and likely Black Panther, who hails from the alternate reality of 13729. Yeah, sadly Storm and T'Challa have never had a child together in the main continuity. I know, it's a bit of a bummer. Unless they had like a real secret child that we just don't know about yet, but I doubt it. Chimera seems to have inherited the powers of her mother, but also shares a connection to the Earth, which allows her to draw on and harness its energy. She is also a skilled tracker and can communicate telepathically with animals. I'd also assume, as she's the daughter of Storm, that she's a skilled combatant as well. As while Storm is more well known for her goddess status and weather manipulation powers, she is also an extremely skilled fighter. And if she's Black Panther's daughter, then she should definitely be a skilled fighter. I mean, you got two amazing parents that are both amazing fighters, so just saying. Number 7. Charles Xavier II. Charles Xavier II is the son of Charles Xavier and Mystique, if you can believe that. I know, it's pretty shocking. Charles Xavier II was technically born into the reality of Earth 616, where we later find out that while Mystique actually took the form of Moira when giving birth, Charles actually knew that he was in a relationship with Raven, so it wasn't like a trick of hers. They were actually just wanted to be together, I guess. This version of Charles, however, is an all grown up one from the alternate future of Earth 13729. When his powers first manifested, he accidentally killed his adoptive mother and ended up later joining forces with his half-brother Raze, another child of Mystique's sired by Wolverine, another child of the X-Men. Charles Xavier II has a brilliant and conniving mind and, like his father, is an immensely gifted telepath, capable of using his powers to bend others to his will. Number 6. Polaris. Polaris is the daughter of Magneto, and while you might not think of Magneto as being an X-Men, considering, you know, he started out as an X-Men villain, he has also worked with the team before and even served as a member himself. Heck, at one point he was in charge of the whole New Mutants crew, let's not forget that. Magneto may have some questionable methods when it comes to getting injustice that put him on the spectrum of villain, but I think at the end of the day, he's just trying to do what's best for mutants. Or at least what he thinks is best for mutant kind. Polaris, like her father, also has magnetic-based powers, which, like her father, are also pretty impressive. Polaris is considered an alpha-level mutant and recently got to join the X-Men team herself after being elected to join them in the Krakoan X-Men elections. Psychic elections. Imagine if we could all just vote psychically. That would be awesome. That would be so much easier. You would just like sit down and you'd be like, who do I want to vote for? Done. Number 5. Cable. Cable is the son of Scott Summers, aka Cyclops, non-X member Madeline Pryor, who later becomes the villain known as the Goblin Queen, and another X-Man's, Jean Grey, who kind of becomes like an adoptive mother but who also possesses Madeline's memories of raising baby Christopher. Because comics. Cable is Nathan Christopher Charles Summers, often referred to as just Nathan Summers or really just Cable, although back in the day we did know him as Baby Christopher. Cable as a baby was kidnapped by Apocalypse and infected with the techno-organic virus. This is the only thing that makes him weak-ish, but really he is still amazingly strong as he can even fend off that virus, containing it to one side of his body using his psionic powers. That in and of itself is pretty impressive as the techno-organic virus is generally known for being, well, unstoppable. Even with his psionic powers mainly preoccupied, Cable is still a hard one to beat, as he has so many combatant-based skills that he brings to the table, and he is also an experienced time traveler besides. Number 4. Rachel Summers. Yes, get ready because many of the most powerful X-Kids out there just happen to be Summers related, so yeah, get ready for that. Honestly, I've always wanted to do a video just to explain the complicated nature that is the Summers and Grey family tree, which honestly is a lot, and it's very timey-wimey. Rachel herself is one of those very complex kids of theirs. She is the daughter of Jean Grey and Scott Summers from the alternate Earth of 811. In that reality, she was made into a hound, a weapon used to hunt down mutants, even being one herself. Rachel is an extremely powerful telepath and telekinetic who also has the ability to chronoskim and manipulate time, even traveling through it. Rachel is also known for being an avatar of the Phoenix, at one time actually considered the true avatar for it, but then later having the power sort of dialed down to a mere echo of it. So she was no longer the true avatar, they were just like, you just have a thing, and it's not even like the real Phoenix Force, but it's like a version of it. Still, the seeming piece or echo of the Phoenix Force that resides within her has been known to flare up from time to time, or her connection to the Phoenix Force, however we want to see that, occasionally boosting Rachel to an off-the-charts level of power. But like I said, that doesn't happen all the time. Number 3. Hope Summers. Hope is the adopted daughter of Cable, who was originally known as the Mutant Messiah Baby. Cable saved Hope from Bishop, who basically wanted to destroy her. In Bishop's reality, the Mutant Messiah would end up causing the event that led to the oppression and persecution of mutants. However, in Cable's reality, the Mutant Messiah would grow up to become a savior, so you can see why these two were opposed on this topic. For the X-Men of Earth 616, the Mutant Messiah was the first new mutant to have been born since basically M-Day, and so she brought hope to the mutants of the 616 reality. Cable body-slided with Hope to another time to raise her in safety. He would end up naming Hope after her adoptive mother, his love who died, Hope, and she got the Summers name from Cable himself. But although she looks a lot like Jean, she actually has no biological relation to the Summers or the Grey families, at least not that we know of. Hope's mutant abilities allow her to copy the powers of anyone within a certain range. Hope also gains access to these powers without struggling at all to use them, receiving them basically at their peak level and with the auto knowledge basically of how to use them. So if you're like, oh, she's gotta like figure it out, no, she's just like instant god mode with those powers basically. Number 2. Scarlet Witch. Wanda is known for being one of the most powerful beings in the Marvel Universe. She has used her powers to completely warp reality the world over, and her chaos magic has pulled off other immensely world-changing feats, such as flipping the alignment of all major heroes and villains in the comics during the events of Axis. Initially, her chaos magic powers were believed to be somewhat mutant in origin. In fact, they were kind of presented initially as like Jinx-like mystical mutant abilities during her first appearances. However, we've since learned that both Wanda and her superpowered brother Pietro, aka Quicksilver, were never really mutants at all, nor were they related to Magneto. However, they still spent a good amount of their life around Magneto, who secretly believed them to be his children, and then another good amount of time thinking that he was their actual father, until it was revealed that this was all due to manipulation by the High Evolutionary. High Evolutionary just coming in and messing pretty much everybody up when it comes to their backstories and origins. Wanda herself has never really gotten along with the X-Men, especially since the events of M-Day, but she is still considered, I think, a part of Magneto's family, and a powerful one at that, regardless of her status as a mutant or a non-mutant. I know there are some people out there that want to be like, it never happened, but like, they still spent a lot of time together thinking that they were family, so I think we can still count it, friends. Also, make Wanda a mutant again. Do it. Make it happen. Give me Wanda and Quicksilver back. Number 1. X-Man. X-Man is Nathaniel Gray, the lab-born child made by combining the genetic materials of both Jean Grey and Cyclops. So basically like Cable, but if he had been made perfectly by villain Mr. Sinister. He actually hails from the alternate reality of AOA, Age of Apocalypse, Earth 295. Here, Sinister created him to use as his own weapon, but of course, Nate being so powerful, managed to escape Sinister and instead ended up being raised by Forge of Earth 295. He is considered one of the most powerful mutants of all time, which would also make him one of the most powerful children of the X-Men out there. Nate can warp reality, resurrect the dead, resurrect himself, travel to alternate Earths and dimensions, and even manipulate the time stream. He's basically the most OP of characters when it comes to the Marvel Universe. And if you've seen artwork of him, you will probably recognize him as someone who looks like Mutant Jesus, which yes, he is god level, so that is the point.
Number 10. Artie. Arthur Artie Maddox is an interesting one. His mutant abilities manifested when he was just 11 years old, leaving him disfigured and mute, but granting him the very interesting ability of visual telepathy. This means that Artie can connect to his or others' thoughts, and he can project those thoughts as psionic holograms or pictograms. This is really useful for Artie, specifically as he is a mute, but at the same time, I gotta say I think that regular telepathy would kind of be a bit more useful, and I don't know. Doesn't matter, because Artie's power is more cool, because he can even make large-scale holograms and use them in battle, usually for defense. But Artie can also perform something called a mind lock that allows him to paralyze someone physically or mentally. I kinda hope he keeps evolving his powers, but we'll see. Number 9. I Scream. I Scream, that's I, like this, or Scream, like is a villain of the X-Men who decided he needed to destroy the X-Men using their Danger Room. He actually got pretty far in that plan too, and he was able to overload Cerebro, taking down Professor X temporarily. Now I'm going to assume he did that by giving the device a brain freeze, because if you hadn't guessed, Ice Scream can turn into any flavor of ice cream, and then everyone screams for Ice Scream's ice cream. No, that's not true, sorry. But using his abilities, he was able to enter the X-Men's mansion and the Danger Room before Xavier came back too and lowered the temperature in there, freezing Ice Scream's ice cream form, which is when a clown turned him into a banana split and split from the scene. Just go read Amnoxio the Clown from 1983, you'll get it. Make sure you guys check out the other videos in this series and drop a like on this video to show us your support. Number 8. Peeper. Peeper, or Peter Quinn, first appeared in Captain America Annual number 4 in May 1977 as part of Magneto's new Brotherhood, a brotherhood of verbally based villains. Slither, Shocker, Lifter, Burner, and Peeper. Seems like a bit of lazy writing over at Marvel to me, but this group actually went under a couple different names under a couple different leaders, including Mandrill and the Red Skull. Peeper though is definitely the most interesting of the bunch, and he's also more relevant as he has appeared recently as part of Abigail Brand's sub-team called the Six. On this team, Peeper played the role of the Eye, using his abilities to examine Chiron or Kerbon particles. That's because Peeper has the gift of telescopic, microscopic, and X-ray vision using his enlarged eyes, but he also had an offensive ability in the form of yellow or red concussive optic blasts. He also seems like a decent dude, despite usually being a villain. Number 7. Brew. Saying that a mutant is unique kind of feels redundant, as most mutants have pretty unique abilities from others of their kind, but Brew is even more unique as he is not a mutant of the human race. Instead, Brew is a mutant of the incredibly violent and parasitic insectoid alien race known as the Brood. This essentially means he can actually feel compassion and friendship, and he was born separately from the Brood hive mind, meaning he is not loyal to a Brood queen. He also possesses super genius levels of intelligence, making him one of the smartest students at Jean Grey's school for higher learning. So, Bru's X gene mutation is only really mental or psychological in nature, but being a brood, he brings natural body armor and fanged jaws to a fight, and recently, Bru actually consumed a king egg, making him king of the entire brood species, including the brood queens. Number 6. Big Bertha. Bertha Crawford, originally Ashley Crawford until she changed her name, had the mutant ability of total control over her body's physical size and mass. She can add or take away hundreds of pounds to herself at will, controlling her figure. This allowed her to become the highest paid fashion model in America at one point, but also allowed her to don the Big Bertha superhero persona. Using her abilities to add bulk and mass, she actually increases her durability and her strength to a peak of lifting 50 tons, allowing her to jump huge distances like the Hulk. No matter what size Bertha alters herself to though, she has a high level of athleticism. Ashley rebranded herself into a plus size model, which is when she changed her name to Bertha, and you know what? She still kinda killed it. Good job. Number 5. Decimus Furious. Decimus Furious actually began his life all the way back in ancient Rome, where his mother and father took their own lives, leaving Decimus homeless on the streets. In 281 AD, on the cusp of the afterlife due to his hunger, his mutant powers activated. This gave him super strength and durability, alongside an extremely bestial form, similar to like a minotaur, but almost as if it was made of stone. He's really super cool looking, honestly. But his more powerful ability would be empathic war infection. This basically means that Decimus can infect anyone who he strikes with a thirst for war, which will send them into a rage-filled state. It also acts as a defensive tool against telepaths who try to read or control his mind, causing the war infection to overcome the telepath. He has also been shown to be able to piece himself back together after being blown up, which is funny because he blew up when Phantom X made him feel love, which did not compute, and he just went boom. He became Apocalypse's final horseman of war. Number 4. Warpath. James Proudstar is the younger brother of John Proudstar, also known as Thunderbird, and he always idolized his brother, but in that idolization he actually limited his own powers to a degree. Mostly, his mutation boosts up his physical capabilities, granting him super strength that has had various different levels, once having Hulk levels of strength, but another time struggling to fight an alligator. He can run at 100 miles per hour, and his stamina allows him to exert himself for 24 hours without rest. He can withstand a hell of a lot more than a regular human, like falling several stories or being hit with energy blasts. His agility and reflexes are increased to the point of dodging bullets, and his senses allow him to see in the dark and hear sounds other humans can't. After some training with Pete Wisdom, Warpath has shown the ability of self-propelled flight and a regenerative healing factor. What's really interesting is that while working with Ghost Rider, James gained shamanistic abilities like perceiving spirit energy. He's also probably one of the best mutant combatants, whether it's unarmed or armed with his vibranium daggers. Number 3. Gideon. I believe Gideon here is the first external to make this list. The externals include immortal mutants like Selene and Apocalypse, but they all share a psychic link which separates them from other immortal characters. Gideon was born during the 15th century, and aboard Christopher Columbus's first expedition, he actually succumbed to scurvy, and his life was changed forever when he resurrected and gained his mutant abilities. Like all externals, Gideon is immortal and no longer ages. He can also resurrect himself, as confusing as that sounds since he's immortal, but unique to him is the ability of power mimicry, giving himself the powers, advanced skills, and talents of any being, android, or even battlesuit, and he's been able to gain the powers of 3 people at once. But more than that, his powers allow him to fully understand how to use that other person's powers to the point that he can even overcome the original user of said power. Number 2. Cypher. Cypher, or Doug Ramsey, has omnilingual translation abilities, and considering that communication is an essential part of our everyday lives, whether that be with other humans, devices, or even our own selves, I'd say he's pretty powerful. He can translate language of literally any origin, even alien. He can read and decipher codes, including computer code, as well as read body language, subtext, and unspoken intention. More recently, everything he sees is interpreted interpreted as information, meaning he basically kind of just reads life. He can read body language to the extent he is able to predict people's moves before they make them. He can learn and perform spells for magic users, and he even created his own overly complex language that makes him immune to psychic mind reading. But Doug actually merged with Warlock, essentially giving Doug techno-organic shapeshifting abilities on top of everything else. And for our number one spot, we are going to talk about my number one favorite X-Men, Nightcrawler. Kurt Wagner was first introduced in Giant Size X-Men number 1 in April 1975, with the mutant ability to biophysically displace himself into the Brimstone dimension, travel through it with a subconscious sense, and then return back to our dimension in a different location, essentially teleporting. This all happens so fast it's almost instant, and it always is accompanied by the signature BAMF sound. Although he can teleport really far, even across the world more recently, he avoids teleporting to places he hasn't been before, or places he can't see, as he can accidentally end up appearing within solid matter, which could potentially end his life. Although he does have a small amount of spatial awareness that at least keeps his feet from teleporting into the ground, and he can even use the little demon things known as BAMFs as teleportation beacons that allow for teleportation to places he hasn't been before, even across dimensions. Through his unique physiology, he gains a few extra abilities as well, like a prehensile tail, microsuction hands and feet, and flexible bone structure, but he can also camouflage himself, bending light using the Brimstone dimension. But what a few might not know is that he actually became immortal thanks to the fact that recently he sacrificed his soul in heaven to come back to life, which is good because I never want to lose this legendary blue mutant. Number 10 is Spike. I talked about Marrow in part 8, so it's only fair that I talk about the animated X-Men Evolution character known as Spike. Spike, or Evan Daniels, was actually the nephew of Aurora Monroe, but his mutant powers are much different than hers. Similar to Marrow, Evan can manipulate his bones, causing it to project through his skin to create armor and bone spikes that he can use as melee weapons, or he can even launch the spikes from his body as projectiles. Unlike Marrow though, Spike's bones piercing through his skin and being broken off, or fired as projectiles, doesn't actually hurt him, which is a huge benefit. What's super interesting though is that after some time with the Morlocks, Spike was able to make his bone spikes so hot they were almost on fire, which actually kind of raises more questions that go unanswered than anything else. In at number 9 is Avalanche. You don't often get Greek mutants, which makes Dominic Petros a pretty unique character already. Dominic came from the Greek island of Crete, which is somewhere I desperately want to travel to, so if someone can hook me up with that'd be great, thanks. Like a lot of mutants though, he started out as a villain. Originally part of the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, then X-Corps, Project Wide Awake, Freedom Force, and Villains for Hire. He's gotten around, and with the destructive capabilities of his powers, it honestly kind of makes sense. Avalanche can create super powerful vibration waves from his hands. These waves can cause matter to shatter or crumble, and if he uses it on the earth or even large buildings, he can basically create earthquakes or, wait for it, avalanches. But Avalanche has quite the control over this ability, able to move objects, create tidal waves, cause the ground to move or shatter, or even ride waves of earth as transportation. And he even used his abilities to be a fantastic landscaper. If you guys are enjoying this content, I beg of you, slap that thumbs up button. It's the only thing you can do to prove you're loyal to me. I mean, to show your support. Number 8, the Blob. The Blob, or Frederick Dukes, is one of those characters I really didn't give enough credit to when I was growing up. He can actually do some pretty cool things, and some things that didn't even occur to me. His actual main mutant ability, for example, is that he can essentially become immovable by creating a monodirectional increase of gravity beneath him that extends out about 5 feet in radius from his center of balance. But what's even cooler is that with some training, Blob was able to manipulate his gravitational aura outwards in order to trigger a localized implosion. Also, the blob is incredibly durable. The fat on the blob is able to absorb the impact of rifle bullets, cannonballs, bazookas, and even torpedoes. He has even been able to survive being hit by a meteorite that was 50 feet in diameter moving at terminal velocity, which is insane. But that's not all. Blob is also able to manipulate his body, basically shapeshifting to a degree. After undergoing the Mother Vine enhancement process, Blob even developed a secondary mutation, liquid form. And here I thought he was just incredibly fat. Number 7, Caliban. If you have seen Logan, then you'll recognize Caliban as the bald, seemingly albino mutant who hangs out with Logan and Professor X. In that movie, he displays Caliban's main ability, which is being able to detect mutants' X genes, usually within about a 25-mile radius. Although, it's worth noting he has been able to detect particularly powerful mutants from further away before. But what I want to talk about is Caliban's other power that most people don't know. It's called his flight or fight response. So whenever Caliban feels stressed, he manifests 2 extra powers: super strength that can overpower Spider-Woman, and fear absorption. This second power allowed Caliban to absorb the psionic energy created in the fear from others and amplify it back into his environment, doing things like very quickly turning those nearby into a fear-induced panicking mob. This ability was boosted by Apocalypse twice when Caliban served him as both death and pestilence. Number 6, Frenzy. Joanna Cargill, like a lot of the X-Men, started off as a villain. She ran away from her home after her mutant powers activated, and she caused the passing of her not-so-great dad in self-defense. From there, she would join Apocalypse's Alliance of Evil, where she would do battle with the X-Men. She would go on to join the Acolytes and eventually the X-Men too. Now, she works as an agent of S.W.O.R.D. on Abigail Brand's X-Men Red Team. So, with a history like that, she has got to have some cool powers. Well, Frenzy's main power is invulnerability. She possesses steel-hard skin, which has only ever been penetrated by adamantium. She's also highly resistant to extreme hot and cold, as well as radiation, and she can withstand high impact forces like Cyclops' optic beam or a punch from She-Hulk. Speaking of She-Hulk, a byproduct of Frenzy's power is that she has super strength as well, enough to lift around 25 to 75 tons and punch Jennifer Walters back if she wants to. Number 5, Typhoid Mary. Okay, so if you know who the Mutant Legion is, the one who has hundreds of different alternate personalities that all have different mutant powers, well, Mary Walker is sort of like that, only for Mary, she has only a handful of alternate personalities, and they just allow her to access the powers that just Mary can't access. Those powers include limited amounts of pyrokinesis, telekinesis to move small objects, grabbing her dropped weapons or even turning objects into armor, and telepathy, usually used to manipulate others or influence people to do things without thinking, like kissing her or grabbing their weapons. Her Mary persona is a pretty quiet and timid person with no actual powers, but her other main persona is Typhoid, who is more adventurous, lustful, and violent. She later adopted a few other personas like Bloody Mary, who was sadistic and brutal and pretty much hated all men. Kind of understandable, sort of. And Mutant Zero, who was a cold, calculated, and militaristic person. Number 4, Mask. The Morlock leader, Mask, has a pretty ironic ability. He himself is not exactly the most gorgeous of beings, but his abilities allow him to alter the appearances of others through touch, molding their bodies and features like clay, or just mentally influencing the change he desires. He can alter people's hair and skin color, body structure, and several other features, including turning limbs into tentacles. Mask can also use his powers in combat by making an enemy's limbs attached to their body, like that, or by closing their breathing orifices to limit their combat prowess. His powers of body manipulation later evolved so that he could alter his own flesh, but the new limits of his powers were stated to be a secondary mutation by Charles Xavier. Apparently, when Mask's body was pierced by Shatterstar's sword, Mask instinctively altered his own internal organs to help him survive, and ever since, he's been able to modify his own body. But what he can do exactly in terms of modifying his own body hasn't really been told yet, so we don't really know. Number 3, Christine Cord. Although Christine Cord, now going by Longstrike, doesn't actually have any mutant powers anymore after M-Day, she used to actually go by the name Tattoo, because her mutant ability was a chameleon skin that allowed Christine to form words or patterns on her skin which she could use to camouflage herself or convey messages. But she actually has a secondary ability in the form of biophasing. This basically meant that Christine was able to move through matter, and if she reached into another person, which is a terrifying thought, she could disrupt the neurochemistry of a person and or alter their molecular composition. Unfortunately, we won't know what else she could have possibly done because after losing her abilities and joining the New Warriors, she unfortunately did not live for too much longer. And at number 2 is Jeb Lee. Jeb Lee is one of the final horsemen of the mutant apocalypse. He was chosen as Famine after Apocalypse watched Jeb using his drums at Gettysburg during the Civil War. Now, using his drums made Apocalypse choose Jeb as a horseman? Yes, it did, because Jeb has an incredibly unique mutant ability, which is to transmit a bio-auditory cancer that feeds on the flesh of all who can hear it whenever he makes a tapping noise, whether that be with his drums or even just tapping his fingers on a table. Jeb has a pretty, dark past, as you can probably imagine. Lee was a Confederate spy during the United States Civil War, walking the battlefields dressed as a Union soldier. Now, after returning back home, his Union Army uniform was discovered and his family was burned alive, which manifested his mutant powers. He then used these powers to go back to war, marching from battle to battle and taking the life of every human in his trail. And at number 1 is Dakin. Dakin, or Akihiro, possesses a lot of the same abilities as his father, Wolverine. He has a crazy healing factor, superhuman senses, and of course, bone claws. But what some people may not be aware of is the one mutation he possesses that neither his father nor his sisters possess. That power would be pheromone control. Dakin has empathic pherokinetic abilities that allow him to use his pheromones to manipulate the emotional state and sensory perceptions of others. He has used this to instill intense fear, happiness, depression, fascination, and a false sense of security in others. The false sense of security, though, is the definitely most interesting one, as it has allowed him to sneak up on others without them even worrying that he could be there, which is so cool. He has also used this ability to alter others' depth perception and vision, making them fight sluggishly. He can also control his own pheromones to make him basically untrackable, even to someone like Wolverine. Now, there are limits to Dakin's pherokinesis, but it is such a cool ability. Moving on to number 10 with Marrow. Of all the mutant powers out there, I think the one I would actively try to avoid having, if that was how it works, is the abilities of Marrow. Now, Marrow's actual mutant ability is a hyper-accelerated metabolism, and it's through this that she's able to do what most people know her for, accelerated bone growth. She has the ability to control the growth, shape, and toughness of her bone structure, even having it protrude from her body and be used as weapons that she can remove. She can also use this ability to create a sort of armor. Now, the only problem, and the reason I wouldn't want it, is that it hurts when she does it, and just imagine how much that would hurt, having your bones protrude from your body. No thank you, I'll pass. Luckily, she has a very rapid healing factor that also gives her enhanced strength, agility, and reflexes, and as a little bonus, this girl has 2 hearts, which allowed her to actually survive when she had one pulled out. Nice. Number 9, Eunice the Untouchable. Now, I gotta say the force field abilities of wrestler, criminal, and villain Eunice the Untouchable definitely have some major drawbacks. The positives are great. His force field can withstand blows from the Incredible Hulk. He can project his force field to move objects. He could also use the shield to be untouchable, hence the name, opening it up to be able to grab things and eat. Now, the drawback would come in the fact that there have been multiple times where Eunice had his abilities increased, but to a point he couldn't even control his own abilities. At this time, his shield would literally close him off from everything. He couldn't grab things, eat food, or even breathe oxygen, which caused him to even pass out on one occasion, which luckily deactivated his powers, allowing him to actually live. Maybe if he used his powers for good, the writers would make him less self-destructive, but these are the cards you're dealt, bro. Guys, if you are indeed enjoying this video, do make sure to give it a little thumbs up. It's all you gotta do to let us know that you're enjoying what you're seeing. Thanks, nerds. Appreciate you. And at number 8 is Pyro. St. John Allardyce is an Australian pyrokinetic mutant mutant. He has the ability to control flame to grow in size and intensity and to even take on any form he desires. He has used flame to create almost solid creations he refers to as, quote, the living flame, which have been in the shape of gigantic claws, birds, or even golems. The size, power, and intensity of the fire beings Pyro created were limited only by the extent of his imagination, the degree of his concentration, and his force of will. The only problem for Pyro is that he cannot generate flames spontaneously. He needs a source, which has been flamethrowers in his costume, other allies like Lockheed, or like a lighter or something. He could also be burnt by any fire that wasn't under his direct control. Now, he used his abilities mainly for evil deeds and crimes, but since his resurrection on Krakoa after he died due to the legacy virus, he has gone on to join Kate Pryde's Marauders and got this crazy skull tattoo on his face. It's kind of cool, but also I wouldn't do it, but you know, whatever. Number 7, Strife. You know, a lot of the characters on these lists have come into contact with the character of Strife. And while most people do know how powerful Strife is, I think not including him on this far into this series is kind of a sin. So, Strife is actually a clone, created by Mother Ascani and taken by Apocalypse, a clone of Nathan Summers, whom most of you know as Cable. Strife is essentially what Cable could have been had he not been infected by the techno-organic virus that he needs to use his powers to constantly keep at bay. Without that limitation, just like Cable, Strife is an Omega level telekinetic, at least that's what he calls himself, and it's stated that he is the 3rd most powerful one on Earth. He is able to do almost all of the other things telepaths of his level are capable of, plus powerful defensive and offensive telekinetic powers. But he is also cybernetically enhanced to have superhuman physical attributes thanks to Apocalypse. Strife is an incredibly powerful villain not to be taken lightly at all. And at number 6 is Reaper. Pantu Hurageb has some interesting abilities to say the least. When he first appeared as part of Strife's Mutant Liberation Front, Reaper had the ability to generate a paralyzing effect on others that slowed their mobility and reaction times. He would usually use his scythe as a conduit for this ability, and it could even fully paralyze victims. But later, Reaper was enhanced by the Weapon X program, who gave him cybernetic prosthetic arms that could take different shapes, although you likely won't be surprised to hear they usually took the form of scythes that would still act as a conduit for his abilities. Unfortunately, Reaper did lose his abilities on M-Day, only to regain them again and then have them drained again. So he doesn't have any powers right now, I'm pretty sure. Or they're like diluted or something, I don't know. Number 5, Dragoness. For Tamara Kurtz, she was born a mutant directly because of the nuclear fallout caused by Hiroshima that her parents were exposed to, which is a different reason than a lot of other mutants, which to me makes her more interesting. She only debuted in 1990, so she's only been around for about 30 years, but she has certainly established herself as a powerful mutant so far, displaying the ability of bioelectricity generation, kind of like an eel. No, I'm just kidding. She's not like an eel. She usually uses this electricity in electrical blasts and pyrotechnic flares, which she used as part of Strife's Mutant Liberation Front. Since her introduction, she has also been seen as a vampire, after which she died and has since been revived, so she may or may not still be a vampire as well. I have no idea. Also, for a while she was equipped with these biotechnic pair of wings, which in the House of M were actually completely organic. I'd be stoked to see her show up again in comics and maybe expanded upon. I don't feel like there are many electricity-based mutants, so it'd be kinda cool. Number 4, Slab. A lot of you liked seeing Thumbelina in part 7 of this list, but what about her brother? Chris Anderson was a member of Mr. Sinister's Nasty Boys, and his life before this time isn't very well known. He has abilities similar to his sister. Where she can decrease in size, Slab has been shown to increase in size, getting stronger and more durable as he does so. Later on, he joined the Mutant Liberation Front, and even more recently than that, he has been seen on the Mutant Nation of Krakoa, where he went on to join up with Sword as part of their security division. Number 3, Vincente. He isn't really the most impressive of characters, although his abilities are certainly interesting, even if he usually gets defeated. On Earth 616, Vincente was a member of M-Plate's Hellions team. He had the ability to change his body from solid, liquid, or gas forms. Now, as a gas or liquid, he has been shown to be able to mix himself in with other materials and substances. So, for example, he once mixed himself in with some soup, Or, in the Age of Apocalypse world, he became wine inside a bottle. Over time, he further developed his abilities so that in his gas form, he could now render himself poisonous if inhaled. He was defeated twice, and since the last defeat, he hasn't really appeared more. Not yet at least, so let's cross our fingers and hope he shows up. Number 2. Skids. Sally Blevins, otherwise known as Skids, has a long history in Marvel Comics, being involved with many other mutant characters and teams from Magneto and Charles Xavier to the Morlocks and Exterminators. First introduced in X-Factor number 7 in August 1986, Skid's mutant ability is to create frictionless force fields that protect her from pretty much all physical attacks, falls, energy weapons, and projections. It can also allow her to kind of skate at a bit of speed given the frictionless nature of these force fields. She can also use her force fields to extend to others if she focuses. There was one really cool moment when she protected Avalon from breaking up upon re-entry to the Earth's atmosphere with help from Jean Grey. That was really cool. So if you ever check that out, check it out. That made no sense. Whatever. Let's move on. Number 1. Wind Dancer. Sophia Mantiga was increasingly isolated at a young age, being ignored by her father, Walter Barrett, after the death of her mother and being told to not use her powers. Now, Sophia finally reached a breaking point. She entered into one of her father's grocery stores and let loose a hurricane inside of it. After she was arrested by police, Mr. Barrett was confronted by Danielle Moonstar, who saw Sophia on the news. She, persuaded him to enroll Sophia into the Xavier Institute. Sophia Mantiga has aerokinesis that she uses to amplify small vibrations in the air and draw far-off sounds to her ears. She can also disrupt the equilibrium of others with compressed air, lift herself off the ground for flight, create sharp forces of wind that can cut through material, and she even creates isolated whirlwinds or direct blasts of high-pressure air control. And she can manipulate the movement of air, but this is all before she was depowered. She has been a part of the Marauders, X-Corporation, New Warriors, and New Mutants Squad. Coming in right at number 10 is Richter. Julio Richter has a pretty interesting mutant power. Richter can manipulate various aspects of the planet itself. Originally, his powers manifested in simple seismic energy, allowing him to create earthquakes, shock waves, and rudimentary transport of Earth matter. However, after Richter's powers evolved, he now has the ability to remotely terraform the ground around him in a much more precise manner. He can toss rocks around with precision or will the ground to open up like a tunnel. But he also has some skill with plants, controlling vines and other plants to ensnare his opponents. Julio also gained magma kinesis after being trapped under an active volcano and just rising out of it, riding on top of the magma like an absolute badass. More impressive than that though is that Richter's powers have created a psychic / empathic bond between himself and the primal life force of Earth's biosphere, allowing him some clairvoyance and mysticism. Definitely one of the coolest characters I have never heard of. I just wanted to pause here to say if you're enjoying this list so far, dropping a like is all you have to do to help us out and let us know that this is what you want to see. And on that note, we're gonna get to number 9, who is Gorgeous George. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and when I behold George Blair, gorgeous is not the word that comes to mind, but nonetheless that is the name he holds. Gorgeous George's body is composed of this tar or putty-like stuff that, through his thoughts, can be expanded, morphed, and reshaped in any way he wants. Using this ability, he has been able to turn his entire body into a puddle or make himself extremely slippery to avoid capture. Side note, becoming extra slippery just makes me like ick, you know? I don't like that slipperiness. George is also very hard to injure. He can reconstitute parts of his body and can even bend to dodge attacks. The slippery thing also kind of helps with this as well. He has also once tried to choke Strong Guy by using his powers to enter his lungs, which is just a terrifying thought. On a lighter note though, his arms are actually longer than normal because he forgot their normal length after getting drunk with other members of Mr. Sinister's Nasty Boys. Well, that's kind of cool. Number 8, Thumbelina. Are you getting tired of seeing all these super-powered beings who look like they just walked off a runway? Well, lucky for you, there is Christina Anderson, who goes by the moniker of Thumbelina. She's short, she's stout, she's slow, and she's always being made fun of. But she has a pretty useful mutant ability. Thumbelina can shrink down to 1/4 of an inch, making her an excellent candidate selected it for missions of espionage with the Mutant Liberation Front. The best part about Thumbelina's powers though is that she retains her full-size strength in her miniature size and has even been shown to actually increase in strength as she shrinks. So make fun of her all you want, but Thumbelina has proved instrumental to the Mutant Liberation Front team, even being the reason their first mission was such a success. Number 7 is Strong Guy. I kinda can't believe I haven't talked about Guido Carosella yet. Despite this guy's massive hulking appearance, he is one of the most entertaining mutants around. Essentially, Guido, who goes by the name Strong Guy, has the ability to absorb kinetic energy and use it to enhance his physical strength. Now at a base level, he can lift around 50 tons, which is already more than a lot of superpowered beings. But using his kinetic absorption, he can boost that strength up to far above 100 tons, making him one of the strongest characters in Marvel Comics. Unfortunately, Guido's body suffers from his mutation. Storing the kinetic energy he absorbs for more than 90 seconds will permanently distort his body in very painful ways. The distortions he's already suffering from cause him to be in constant pain, which, being the great guy he is, pushed him towards being absolutely hilarious to hide his pain. Hey y'all, if you love the manga, if you love the anime, well then make sure to check out Most Amazing Top 10 Anime. James is an awesome host bringing you videos just like this one, but with that manga and anime setting. You should definitely check it out. And coming off of that, number 6 is Layla Miller. Of all the mutant powers I've come across, Resurrection is one that doesn't actually happen too often. But Layla's Resurrection ability is an interesting one. It comes with a major side note. Layla has the ability to resurrect dead beings, restoring their bodies and their consciousness, but not their soul. Without their soul, the resurrected being will have no conscience or morality. We saw this happen both with Strong Guy and Trevor Fitzroy, who were resurrected by Layla, who eventually experienced drastic changes in their personality without their souls. Another key factor about this resurrection is that it can only be performed within minutes of the individual's death. Layla claims she can also reverse this process, taking back the life that she gives. Another interesting note for Layla is that during the House of M, Layla was resistant to Wanda's reality warping abilities and retained all of her memories. She could even give others back their memories. She's also been to the future and studied magic with Dr. Doom, so that's cool as well. Coming in at number 5 is M. Just the letter M. Monet St. Croix has an interesting past, and honestly, her family is a big part of that. Her brother is an incredibly powerful bad dude who trapped her in a different form where she is known as Penance. As Penance, she has diamond skin, a telepathic resistance, and super sharp claws. M can even combine with her younger siblings Claudette and Nicole, but on her own, Monet is essentially a near perfect being. All of her physical and mental skills are greater than the natural physical limits of peak humans, granting her super strength, speed, agility, stamina, senses, intuition, and a genius level intellect, as well as reflexes that even allow her to catch bullets. She can fly at supersonic speeds by sheer force of will, she can read minds, project her thoughts into the minds of others, and defensively mask her mind against telepathic intrusion, and she has even displayed some telekinesis. And on top of all that, she has the power of being ridiculously good looking. Lucky. Number 4, Marius St. Croix. I could talk about Monet St. Croix for a long time, but her brother, he is just terrifying and needs to be discussed. Marius, who eventually goes by the name M-Plate, has the ability to siphon mutant energy by feeding on the bone marrow of mutants using his super creepy feeder mouths that appear on the palms of his hands. M-Plate needs the energy from mutants in order to survive, almost like a mutant vampire. And like a vampire, if Marius siphons all of a person's energy, his victims will pass away. Also like a vampire, if M-Plate drains only part of a victim's energy, he can gain a kind of psychic control over their mind and can cause the mutant to become an energy vampire just like him, but under his control. Kind of like a vampire's familiar. Interestingly, when feeding from a victim, he actually cancels out their powers and copies them for himself. After multiple feedings, he even gains their power permanently, like he did with Penance's diamond skin. And at number 3 is Chamber. Chamber, or Jonathan Evans Starsmore, discovered his powers when a blast of psionic energy burst from his torso, destroying much of his chest and his face. It turns out that Chamber is actually literally composed of that same psionic psionic energy, and his body just acts as a shell for it. When his powers burst out of him, the wound was replaced by a constant glow of psionic fire, leaving him unable to speak. Instead, he can only communicate telepathically. Additionally, he does not eat, drink, or even breathe, as he has no organs. Chamber constantly created and unleashed psionic charges of energy that could strike with a volatile force, being projected as a blast from his chest, a series of guided streams that struck specific targets, or as a massive eruption striking in all directions. Now, if he was given the time to train properly, Chamber could have potentially been one of the most powerful mutants to walk the earth, but unfortunately he's not. Number 2, Mikhail Rasputin. As the older brother of both Colossus and Magic, Mikhail Rasputin has quite the mutant genealogy, and he ain't no chump himself. Mikhail is an alpha level mutant with the ability to manipulate subatomic matter and warp energy. His power hasn't really been properly defined, but he could forcibly fuse a man to a tree and could manipulate Bobby Drake, Iceman's body. Speaking of Iceman, Mikhail also seemed to display some form of enhanced perception, being able to see Bobby's potential just by looking at him, and he could show him how to use his powers in better ways. Mikhail has also used his power to fire energy blasts, tamper with people's powers, and most prominently for teleportation. He could transport himself as well as others by opening up dimensional portals by ripping away at the subatomic wall of space, which he did when the Soviets sent him into space and blew up his ship. Sorry. And coming in at number 1 is Sienna Blaze. Sienna Blaze has incredibly strong destructive abilities, thanks to the fact that Sienna can disrupt a planet's electromagnetic energy spectrum, absorbing the energy into her body and then releasing it, usually in destructive blasts. Sienna's released energy would tear a hole in the local electromagnetic field, which is bad, in case you wondered, with repeated use of her power theoretically being able to destroy the planet. She can also use the magnetic energy to fly at 150 miles per hour, or impressively to teleport herself along the planet's electromagnetic field. Again, every time she teleports, she permanently damages the electromagnetic field at the point of departure, causing a pretty strong explosion. As an example, Sienna shot down the X-Men's Blackbird in Antarctica. Sienna then ambushed Cyclops and Storm and nearly completely took them out until Professor X prevented her from using her powers. Then Storm, Cyclops, and Professor X managed to defeat Sienna, except she just teleported away and left a massive explosion in her stead. The Blob, or Frederick Dukes, is one of those characters. Now, I really didn't give the Blob enough credit when I was growing up, and he can actually do some pretty cool things, and some things that didn't even occur to me. His actual main mutant ability, for example, is that he can essentially become immovable by creating a monodirectional increase of gravity beneath him that extends about 5 feet in radius from his center of balance. But what's even cooler is that, with some training, Blob was able to manipulate his gravitational aura outwards in order to trigger a localized implosion. Also, the Blob is incredibly durable. The fat on the Blob is able to absorb the impact of rifle bullets, cannonballs, bazookas, and even torpedoes. He has been able to survive being hit by a meteorite that was 50 feet in diameter, moving at terminal velocity, but that's not all. Blob is also able to manipulate his body, basically shapeshifting to a degree. After undergoing the Mother Vine enhancement process, Blob developed a secondary mutation, liquid form. Now, not actually, but his secondary mutation allowed him to stretch his body to a great extent, and the problem is the mutation was hard to control, so when he first ever manifested it, he stretched himself too far and basically turned into a puddle. Next up is Gambit, and Gambit has the really cool mutant ability of molecular acceleration, allowing him to convert the potential energy of a non-living object through touch and kinetically excite the molecules to the point that they explode. Usually when a mutant has an ability that manipulates molecules, they have a pretty vast array of powers, but for Gambit, he mainly just uses his abilities as attacks, charging up his signature playing cards and bow staff and other objects like that. We have seen him reach the full potential of his power, only this was an alternate reality version of the guy. He could manipulate kinetic energy down to a molecular level, which basically made him a god. But as you may have guessed, Gambit has a second mutation. After a traumatic event left him blind, a secondary mutation kicked in that allowed Gambit to be clairvoyant. Gambit's ability did not give him the power to consciously look into the future. Instead, his secondary mutation acted like a warning system, kinda like the spider sense. He could sense danger and react to it. Now, fortunately for him, Gambit got his sight back not long after losing it, meaning he stopped needing to rely on this secondary mutation, but he does still totally have it. Dakin, or as he's going by now, Akihiro, possesses a lot of the same abilities as his father Wolverine. He has a crazy healing factor, superhuman senses, and of course, bone claws. But what some people may not be aware of is the one mutation he possesses that neither his father nor his sister/clone possesses. That power would be pheromone control. Dakin has empathic ferrokinetic abilities that allow him to use his pheromones to manipulate the emotional state and sensory perception of others. He has used this ability to instill intense fear, happiness, depression, fascination, and a false sense of security in others. The false sense of security one is probably the most interesting, as it's allowed him to sneak up on others without them even worrying that he could be there. He also has used this ability to alter others' depth perception and vision, making them fight sluggishly. He can also control his own pheromones to make him basically untrackable, even to someone like Wolverine. There are limits to Dakin's ferrokinesis, but it's such a cool ability. If you have seen the movie Logan, then you'll recognize Caliban as the blind, seemingly albino mutant who hangs out with Logan and Professor X. In that movie, he displays Caliban's main ability, which is being able to detect mutants' X genes, usually within a 25-mile radius. Although, it's worth noting he has been able to detect particularly powerful mutants from further away before. But what I want to talk about is Caliban's other power that most people don't know. This is called his flight or fight response. Whenever Caliban feels stressed, he manifests two extra powers: super strength that can overpower Spider-Woman, and fear absorption. This second power allowed Caliban to absorb the psionic energy created in the fear from others and amplify it back into his environment, doing things like very quickly turning those nearby into a fear-induced panicked mob. This ability was boosted up by Apocalypse twice when Caliban served him as both Death and Pestilence. The mutant Toad has been a member of the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, and by extension a part of the mutant community for a hot minute, but in my opinion, Mortimer Toynbee hasn't really been utilized as much as he should be given his massive list of abilities. Toad has a degree of superhuman strength, specifically in his back and legs, which allows the little weirdo to jump around 25 to 37 feet, and he'll kick you so hard that you are never getting back up again. He's got flexible bone structure, superhuman stamina, durability, reflexes, and agility. Toad, like a lot of super beings, has a regenerative healing factor, but unlike a lot of mutants, he has UV vision, a super strong 30-foot prehensile tongue, acidic saliva, sticky paralytic resin out of his pores, and pheromone secretion. I can understand why he isn't exactly at the top of the mutant landscape, partially because he's kind of really gross and just overall unpleasant, but he does have a hell of a lot of abilities to offer. The X-Force member known as Shatterstar, a lot like Toad, just has a huge list of abilities that just keeps getting added to. Kavidra 7 learned the arts of battle as a warrior in arenas on Mojo World, where he developed both a sense of honor and incredible fighting skill, but those aren't his abilities. He possesses a large superhero starter pack: superhuman strength, speed, agility, stamina, durability, senses, reflexes, agility, dexterity, coordination, balance, plus a regenerative healing factor and even enhanced learning ability. Now curiously, he actually has hollow bones as well, which makes him lighter than you would think, but also further boosts up his natural physical skills. Now the cool part of Shatterstar are his Mojoverse swords, which he can use with his mutant ability to channel powerful vibratory shockwaves, which can be absolutely devastating but also drains him of energy. But also, after his Mojo time, he can now create X-shaped portals that have to be linked to another person who acts as an anchor for said portals, if that makes any sense. These also drain him, and he has a cooldown of about like 4 days before he can do it again, because this powerhouse needs some kind of balancing of some sort. Next up is Sage. Sage is basically a super genius, with a brain more powerful than any computer in the world, granting her perfect memory and rapid analytical abilities. She can come up with the perfect plan in an instant, learn just about any skill without having to practice, remember everything she's ever experienced, perform multiple tasks at once by allocating a partition of her brain to each task, and, thanks to training with Professor X, she can engage in telepathy. Her telepathic abilities allow her to detect minds and read them, project thoughts, astral projection, cast realistic mental illusions, and she even has a kind of psionic defense unique to her called her firewall. But it doesn't even stop there, as Sage even has some biokinetic abilities as well, including reading another mutant or person's genetic code and DNA, being able to literally see who someone's related to, jump-starting latent or enhancing current mutant abilities, and she has complete control over her physical body, being able to expel nanobots from her body by controlling her immune system, almost like highly advanced antivirus. She needs more time in the spotlight, that's all I'm saying. Next up is Wolfsbane. Rain Sinclair has the mutant ability that I kinda wish I had when I was a wee little lad. She can turn herself into a wolf at will, and can even go into a transitional form that is basically as close to a werewolf without being a werewolf as you can get. In fact, she is basically a werewolf, but with none of the drawbacks of being that kind of monster. She retains all her faculties minus not being able to talk and just being a little tiny bit feral, and is not forced to change only at nighttime. Rain grows much larger than her human form when she changes, and gains access to some enhanced strength, a healing factor, and enhanced vision, which coupled with the body of a wolf grants her enhanced speed and reflexes as well. But then she got a secondary mutation, and it's a weird one. After becoming an agent of New Tien in X-Men Blue number 9, she gained the ability to somehow transform into a pack of 5 wolves, and on top of that, her general wolfy-like characteristics, like claws and teeth and all that jazz, also became stronger and sharper on top of that. Paige Guthrie is part of a family that has a lineage of mutant abilities. Sam Guthrie, Cannonball, Joshua Guthrie, Icarus, Melody Guthrie, Arrow, and Jebediah Guthrie are all part of her family. Paige's power is a wee bit unorthodox though. She has the ability to shed her skin, and by concentrating on specific chemical or elemental formulas, she can cause the layer of skin underneath to be a different element or shape or state. With that power, she's been able to have skin made of metal, diamond, granite, wood, rubber, glass, and one time she even managed to basically turn into a lizard, which should be a secondary ability all by its own. Husk has always had troubles with her powers, such as not being able to morph multiple times without intense pain. However, in Generation X, it got a little bit worse when Paige started suffering from dramatic mood swings and patchwork morphs. It was then revealed later that her secondary mutation also causes her to change personalities every time she morphs, and that can cause her to act out or even black out. And last but not least, as the daughter of Magneto, Polaris actually has pretty much exactly the same abilities as him. She can control and manipulate magnetic fields, allowing her to create force fields, fly on the Earth's magnetic field, emit magnetic concussive pulses that can overload and short circuit electrical systems, and so much more. But there was a very short period of time where she gained a power we have never seen from her father. When the villainess Zaladane stripped Lorna of her powers, leaving her completely vulnerable, the jolt of losing said powers forced Polaris' latent secondary mutation to evolve. Polaris was now able to absorb negative emotional energy to transform into a virtual powerhouse. She grew in height and gained super strength, durability, and invulnerability. Basically, Polaris can Hulk out. Now, after regaining her magnetic powers, Lorna lost her Hulk-like abilities, but it is still technically something that she could do until the Scarlet Witch caused M-Day, which got rid of the ability altogether. Number 10, Emma Frost. She's probably the biggest name on this list. It almost feels like everyone knows her powers, but someone suggested her in the comments, and well, she's awesome. Emma Frost possesses telepathic abilities on a similar level to Charles Xavier. She's been referred to as an Omega-class telepath and has demonstrated the ability to stalemate Exodus and overcome telepaths such as Nate Gray and Rachel Summers through greater experience and skill. With her telepathy, Emma Frost can create psionic shields, telepathic cloaking, telepathic illusions, beings. She can absorb information and upload information into others. Emma can project one's astral form from their body onto the astral planes or the physical planes. She can inhibit others' powers, induce pain, erase a person's memories, and heal mental trauma through psychic surgery. She has intuitive multilingualism, mind control, can create mental links, induce mental paralysis and sedation. She can alter others' minds, cause a kind of mental amnesia. She can telepathically detect and track others, not to mention produce psionic blasts and psionic lightning. And that's not mentioning her secondary mutation of a diamond form. This grants her super durability, strength, and stamina, as well as psychic immunity, but at the cost of her psychic powers. Number 9. Black Tom Cassidy. Black Tom Cassidy is the cousin of Sean Cassidy, who's Banshee, and he was originally a longtime crime partner to the villain Juggernaut, but his powers are interesting to say the least. Originally, his mutant power was bioorganic thermokinetic blasts, generating concussive blasts of force through any wooden medium. Normally, it was forgive my pronunciation, a shillag, which is a traditional Irish wooden fighting stick. Tell me if I messed it up in the comments, please. After a fight with Cable, doctors grafted a wood-like substance onto his wounds, healing him and allowing him to channel his bioblast directly through his fists. But as a result of a genetic virus, the substance spread over Tom's whole body, turning him into a Groot-like looking dude, which actually worked to his benefit, as the secondary mutation gave him plant growth, allowing him to grow to immense size, superhuman strength, a healing factor, chlorokinesis, which is control over plant life within his vicinity. He could distribute his consciousness among plants he controlled, and Cassidy could drain the life force of organic beings. He eventually returned to a human form, but kept the capacity to control plants to a limited degree, mainly focusing his powers on wood specifically, and using the energy channeling aspect of his powers, he could increase his striking power to generate protective shielding. Number 8. Sebastian Shaw. Sebastian Shaw is a mutant that you'll probably best recognize for being the Black King of the Hellfire Club, or the guy who somehow took out Darwin in the X-Men First Class movie. I still think that was dumb. His powers are actually a bit different from that movie though. Shaw has the ability to absorb energy, specifically all forms of kinetic energy directed at him, and use it to enhance his strength, speed, and stamina. This includes physical damage such as that sustained in battle, and kinetic blasts such as Cyclops' optic blast or Gambit's explosions. That's why you'll sometimes see him punching walls, being hit by his own underlings, or allowing himself to be hit by his foes in order to build up more and more of the kinetic energy to empower himself. He can also absorb and use other forms of energy such as electricity and magical energy, as shown in Avengers Academy when fighting Hercules. He can build up and store this energy and release it whenever he chooses. His biggest power, however, comes in the form of being such a powerful and influential figure in the Hellfire Club. Number 7. Jason Wingard. Jason Wingard, otherwise known as Mastermind, is basically an illusionist, but a very, very powerful one. He can psionically manipulate the senses of other people, causing them to see, hear, touch, smell, and or taste things which do not actually exist, or see, hear, touch, smell, and or taste real things in ways that they would not do naturally. So, for example, he can seem to make a solid wall appear in an empty space, or he can make himself look and sound like a different person, or look and feel like a wall, or even seem invisible. Since his power only affects the mind, his illusions cannot be recorded with cameras or anything like that, but his power is so strong that even if his victims know they are being subjected to an illusion, they will still react to the illusion as if it were reality, unless they can rid themselves of all suspicion that it is indeed reality, which sounds a little confusing. Basically, if Mastermind creates the illusion of a wall, most people, even if they know it's an illusion, will still be unable to walk through that wall. His most famous usage of his power, in my opinion, is when he attempted to manipulate Jean Grey, which led to that whole Dark Phoenix thing. Good job, dude. Number 6. Sunspot. Roberto da Costa is another mutant that a lot of people have heard of, especially in the more recent stories that have been coming out of Marvel. But that doesn't mean everyone knows his powers. Bobby da Costa's mutant ability allows him to store solar energy in his cells through a similar method to the way we store energy when we eat food. He can then release it when necessary to enhance his physical strength, usually with the side effect of his body being cloaked in darkness because he drains all the ambient light from his skin, which sounds really cool. The enhancements to his strength through this radiation have allowed him to knock down an alternate universe Hulk, even drawing blood and even restraining Gladiator of the Shi'ar. But other than his physical enhancements, he has also used the energy he absorbs to fly faster than light speed, use pyro and thermokinesis, firing blasts of heat and dark solar plasma, as well as using photokinesis directing light. He's also incredibly tricksy, displayed when he recently manipulated Iska the Unbeaten. I just love this character. Number 5. Trevor Fitzroy. Trevor here, who goes just by Fitzroy, is actually from Earth 1191. There, he was the illegitimate son of Anthony Shaw, the Black King of the Hellfire Club. Trevor's mutant ability was to drain other living beings of their life force, converting it into energy and absorbing it into himself, usually disintegrating his victims. With this life force, he can do a few different things, like opening temporal wormholes to travel across time and space, teleportation, shifting objects into different time frames, altering the flow of time to return people or objects to a previous incarnation, and freezing people in a type of stasis. The thing is, the usage of his power depends on the life force he absorbs. So for example, one wormhole would be equivalent to one person's life force. It's a little scary, to be honest. He did get a big power boost in the Bishop the Last X-Men series, where he tries to become time itself. He is a super cool and super dangerous character. Definitely check him out. Number 4. Harold Leland. Harold Leland was an alcoholic and obese corporate lawyer and also a mutant with the abilities to increase the mass or gravity of a person or object within his line of sight. He can use this ability to increase mass all at once or over time, slowly increasing the more a victim struggles. The power has shown to even break the ground beneath a target depending on the strength of that ground. So for example, there was a time that he sent Wolverine from inside the Hellfire Club all the way through the floor and the ground into the sewers. Also, the human targets would suffer great strain in their muscles, particularly in the heart, with the possibility of suffering physical damage. And if Leland uses his power on an item, that item could crumble if it wasn't particularly durable. Leland joined the Hellfire Club, an elite social club for the rich and wealthy located in New York's 5th Avenue, under Sebastian Shaw. He isn't the most impressive fighter, but his ability has come in handy more than a few times. Number 3. Emma Steed. Emma Steed is actually the Black Queen of the London Hellfire Club. If you are noticing a lot of Hellfire Club members here, that's because there are a lot with very cool powers and not a lot of people know much about them at all. For example, Emma Steed here has a rare form of telepathic power called psionic skinning. This basically allows Emma to create blades of pure psionic energy to attack and disable her foes. These blades aren't purely for physical attack. They actually allow her to do a number of things like warping the minds of people, igniting pain sensors, destroying physical portions of their brain, and destroying psionic forms or astral projections. Using this ability, she was able to de-life the Shadow King, who is an incredibly powerful telepath. As a secondary result of her powers, she is basically immune to any type of psionic or telepathic attack, with her presence being absolutely destructive to telepaths. Number 2. Cora of the Burning Heart. Can we just get an applause for literally the coolest name ever? Like, Cora of the Burning Heart. That's awesome. Cora of the Burning Heart is a mutant from Morocco where she served as an assassin and primarily used her power only to boost her own abilities in battle, thanks to the Iraqi being really stubborn, honor-bound fighters. But Cora's abilities can indeed help others as well. Cora's heart is an internalized combustion furnace, which generates life force energy. Thanks to that energy, she gets this really awesome looking flaming skeletal appearance, and she uses this constant energy source to give herself incredible physical capabilities, as well as boost up the powers of others around her to even greater heights. She was a member of the X-Terminators alongside Cable, and she is also a part of SWORD. Also, Cora of the Burning Heart. Sorry, just wanted to say it again. Super cool. Number 1. Amelia Vaught. Amelia was a mutant born with the ability to transubstantiate solid matter into vapor that she can control, and honestly, it's such a great ability. Seeing the things she can do with this ability is really cool. I said she can transubstantiate matter, and that is including herself and other people. When she turns herself into vapor, she is obviously unharmed by physical attacks, but can then fly through the air as vapor and pass through small holes or cracks. But the vapor is still physically there there, which means she can still move objects as Vapor. She has also turned her allies into Vapor to get them out of dangerous situations, substantiating them beside her. And she's even stolen weapons off of enemies, turning them into Vapor, which she then reformed in her own hands. But wait, there's more. Using the astral plane, Amelia is able to transport herself and anything else across the surface of the globe in an instant, even summoning distant people to herself by teleportation, converting them into mist and then bringing that mist into her presence to be reformed. It's just super cool.
This secondary mutation is an interesting one for me, as I didn't know about it myself. I've never been deep in the know when it comes to Elixir, so it was cool to find out that something I thought was just a core part of his standard mutation is actually perhaps secondary. For this point, we're talking about Elixir's physical mutation, the golden hue of his skin. This change occurred shortly after his first appearance. Only a few issues later, he actually uses his powers to heal himself and his skin changes to a golden color. So it seems to make sense that I wouldn't know this was even a secondary mutation, since most of his appearances have been with this look. Joshua Foley, aka Elixir's skin, also changes color when he uses his powers to harm others, changing from a golden hue to a deep metallic black color. The changing of his skin is not something that Elixir also seems to be able to control, but instead is a mutation that is closely tied to his primary healing and death touch abilities. If your skin changed color anytime you did anything, what would you definitely want it to be or not want it to be? While many heroes have secondary mutations, let's not forget that this whole idea in terms of when it was classified started with Emma Frost, who herself was once a famous villain. Likewise, there have been other villains who have also gained a secondary mutation, but who simply aren't as well known. Enter Black Tom Cassidy, a classic mutant villain, and if you aren't familiar with him, you should be. He's pretty cool. His secondary mutation has changed somewhat throughout his history. It's been described as giving him the upgraded ability to channel his bioblast through his fists, as opposed to needing wood to channel said blast, which is what he originally had, giving him his own plant form, and giving him the power to manipulate plants and wood around him. Like many others on our list, Black Tom actually got this sort of secondary mutation from being mortally wounded, but yeah, it's changed a lot throughout the years in terms of exactly how it works or what it does. It feels weird to include Beast also on this list, but when I think about most people I know who love the X-Men, they usually always think of Beast as being default blue. Now this is because most of the people I know grew up with the 90s or early 2000s Beast after he'd undergone his secondary mutation. Many fans out there still don't know that Beast's original power set was just that he was like super dexterous. He just looked like a guy. He had big feet, big hands, and he swung around a lot. Initially, Beast looked like this guy, but after being exposed to a serum he created, which isolates and boosts the X gene in mutants, he became permanently mutated again, gaining the secondary mutation of the blue fur. In fact, I think Beast may be the first mutant in comics to have developed a secondary mutation, before we even had a terminology for it at that time. He mutated. He's all covered in blue fur, which initially was actually like a gray fur, but that's a whole other story. That has to do with comics coloring and miscommunications and just how blues and blacks got often mixed up by people. With this next one, we're not talking about that time that Kitty Pryde was turned into a cat person in Wundagore, although that was a thing that happened. It was something though that she was given as opposed to an evolution of her mutant-based abilities, and it was temporary. With Kitty, or Kate, it's interesting as there are a few different instances where I feel one could argue that she manifested some kind of secondary mutation, or more specifically evolution of her powers. But this has also, I don't believe, ever fully been confirmed in the comics. Let me know if I missed something and if there is a page where someone says, this is a secondary mutation. I'd like to focus on the heightening of her powers over the years, which I believe is the version of a secondary mutation, as I understand what secondary mutations are, which can either be a significant power boost or it can be something additional. Some people, however, see secondary mutations as just something new and concrete added to a mutant's power set, like Emma Frost's diamond form, which exists separate from her telepathy, but it doesn't need to be that. And in fact, I think a major power boost does count, hence why I'm counting it. and if you don't agree, we can debate about it in the comments. Like when Kitty stopped needing to hold her breath while intangible, or when she was merged with the Black Vortex, becoming all-powerful, but then after giving up the Black Vortex's power, discovered that she had unlocked a new level of power through that, so after using it, it was kind of like an additional mutation. As I said, there are actually multiple moments for Kitty when I feel like this has happened, but those are the main ones that come to my mind. Speaking of folks who have seen major power boosts throughout the years, enter Bobby Drake, aka Iceman. Iceman has had a few different moments like Kitty Pryde where I would say his powers have evolved, and which could be considered a secondary mutation as he severely leveled up. When he learned he could manipulate his body into more than just ice or snow and learned to use his water form. When he learned he could just become straight up ice. That was a whole thing, because before he was, I believe, covered in it. When he healed back up after having his ice form shattered. And when he learned he could make ice clones. Honestly, Bobby's just had a lot of moments because he's super OP. Sync developed a pretty powerful secondary mutation after he returned from the dead during the Krakoan era, so this is a recent one, so you might not know if you're not following with modern comics, or maybe you are and you're like, oh my gosh, this is the one I do know. His secondary mutation is more suspected, I would say, than confirmed. Well, we know he has this ability now, but we don't necessarily know if it is a secondary mutation or not. The ability in question is that he can now remain synced with other mutants even without being near them. I believe the idea is if he's synced with you once, he can kind of sync with you whenever, but of course there are some limits to this and we're still kind of figuring out how that works. I don't think that sync using those powers if you're not near him would be as powerful. However, this mutation also takes a toll on his body and it seems to age him faster every time he uses it. In addition to this, he can also sync with superpowered non-mutants as well, which is huge. As I said, the full extent of his newfound abilities has not been explored, and I don't know if everyone would consider them to be a secondary mutation, as they're still tied to the same power set, but I personally do. I believe secondary mutations can also manifest in a boost to a predetermined power set, and I think this should count. To me, it's a secondary mutation, so there you go. Take it or leave it. Cypher is another hero who went from being kinda lame to kind of insanely powerful thanks to his own secondary mutation. Honestly, I've become a pretty big Doug fan in recent years, now that I better understand just how powerful his power set can be. I think my love of Doug comes from me also realizing just as a person how important communication is in my everyday life, and how much I value being around other people who can communicate well, and also value my ability to communicate with them. When we can't understand each other, it actually creates big problems in our lives, and that's what I appreciate about Doug and his power set. His ability to communicate and through that resolve so many issues without even needing to come to blows. In terms of his mutation, we saw him go from a character who could just understand all languages and communicate with people in that way, to someone who really understood the various minute types of languages around us that often go unnoticed, and thereby become a master of those types of languages as well. Things like technology, and even at one point physically fighting, which is a sort of physical communication or language and dance. This shift in his abilities happened after Doug died and was resurrected, and it honestly puts him on a whole other level, and really he's pretty powerful. I know sometimes we say, oh, communicating, is that powerful? Actually it is. I always forget about Kid Omega's secondary mutation because it just very rarely comes up in the comics anymore. Probably because Quentin Quire no longer finds it interesting, at least that's the canon reason that we were given for this. Though I personally think it sounds super interesting, and I am surprised that he is bored of it. However, this is Quentin, so maybe I shouldn't be so surprised. He is often unimpressed by some of the coolest stuff, or at least he presents himself this way often. Kid Omega's secondary mutation here is a non-corporeal form, which when accessed also speeds up his consciousness and allows him as a telepath to reach out and connect with all sentient beings. He can think at the speed of light while in this form, but then again, even when Quire isn't in it, he is known for being one of the fastest thinkers and one of the smartest psionics on the planet. Maybe that's why he was like, it's alright. I become like whatever, I don't have a physical form, but like, I'm pretty cool even when I have a physical form. Said to be the daughter of Unis the Untouchable, one of the earliest X-Men villains, Carmella's mutant power set is similar to her father's. However, at one point her powers evolved even beyond her her own control. This seems to be a result of being exposed to Mother Vine, which triggered a secondary mutation in her. This mutation would cause her energy field to overcharge the more she used it, making it more devastating in terms of the damage it did to the people and technology around her. And if you aren't familiar with Unis the Untouchable, his main thing was that you couldn't touch him because he had a field around him that made it impossible to touch him. But this is also a field that blasts out in Carmela's case as well. What was worse, she had no control really over the power of her energy field, and she also suffered as a result thanks to overcharge resulting in a backlash. So when it happened, she would also be in pain as well. So she'd be causing pain to others and then also be like, ow. I mean, I know she's like a villain normally, but still, sucks, you know? That would suck, whether you're a villain or not.
Number 10. Vanisher. Vanisher actually has the mutant ability of teleportation, but unlike mutants like Nightcrawler, Vanish's teleporting ability is completely psionic in nature and actually causes him to go through a series of extra-dimensional portals. But he does it so quickly he didn't even realize that was what he was doing. There is actually an instant where he tries to explore his powers more and stops his teleportation partway through, ending up trapped in the Dark Force dimension by its inhabitants. Vanish can also use his ability to bring a certain amount of mass other than himself with him when he teleports, which in one case allowed him to teleport himself and about 8 others from Southern California to Genosha. To add to that, Vanisher can actually also teleport any part of his body, kind of like how the Spot did it, but he does it so little that it's almost kinda not worth mentioning. Number 9. Tag. Brian Cruz, the mutant known as Tag, has the awesome ability called the Pariah Effect. Now this ability allows Brian to psionically tag a target, causing that person to emit a psionic signal that could make everyone, or even a select group of people in an area, either run away from or run towards and dogpile on top of the selected target, or who he likes to call it. The distance of this game of tag was about 100 feet, and everyone affected by the ability, excluding the one tagged, was fully aware of what they were doing while not being able to control their own actions. It's such an interesting ability, and it's fun as well because he can also tag a target with the effect of having that person run away from themselves, so they would just be uncontrollably running until he cancelled the effect. He was part of the group called the Helians until he lost his power on M-Day and passed away in a missile attack shortly afterwards. But luckily, Tag was resurrected on Krakoa, and hopefully we will get to see him use his abilities again at some point. Number 8. Hijack. Marvel's mutant David Bond actually has absolutely nothing to do with British 007s. Instead, David is the mutant known as Hijack with the technopathic ability to assume control over vehicles. It's kind of so oddly specific, and it makes me wonder if the ability works for things like bicycles or like scooters or something. This power gives me more questions than answers, to be perfectly honest. Look, he's controlled buses to ram into sentinels, and he's even been able to control an entire SHIELD helicarrier, and even a fleet of them at one point, which is definitely no small feat of its own. His abilities have even allowed David to control technological suits of armor, but curiously he couldn't control sentinels. Now, while his power could be used in quite a lot of different ways, David wasn't always the most useful of characters, so we didn't get a whole ton of him to analyze. Number 7. Manifold. Originally, Manifold was thought to be a teleporter, but his powers are much more than just teleportation. Eden actually has the ability to communicate with the universe and kind of ask it for certain things, and in turn the universe would change and mold to do what he wanted. So for teleportation, for example, he's actually kind of creating the Einstein-Rosen bridge and folding space to allow himself, or whatever he wants, to be teleported from wherever he is to wherever he wants. It's the same thing when he creates portals. He's used the ability to fold space around him to make him appear invisible, and he can even fold space around beings and things, like when he teleported a bit of the sun's plasma to his hand and folded space around it so it wouldn't be able to hurt him, which is a crazy thought. Even though this ability only works in his native reality, it seems like potentially an incredibly powerful ability. Number 6. La Bandera. First appearing in Wolverine Volume 2, number 19 in the December of 1989, La Bandera is said to be the daughter of a supporter of Fidel Castro, and her mutant ability is basically to be an awesome leader, which in turn apparently powers her secondary mutation. So her first mutation is as an empath, able able to influence the emotions of others, which she mainly used to inspire people to fight against oppression. And then, in turn, the amount of followers she had would power her energy projection powers, which she would channel through her staff. So, if she has no followers, then there's no energy projection. But if she's using her empath abilities properly, then she should always have followers, right? She began fighting dealers, who she followed to the South American country of Tierra Verde, which at that point was ruled by a harsh and corrupt dictator. She teamed up with Wolverine to fight the dictator, but unfortunately she passed away at the hands of Zeitgeist in 1995 and hasn't really been talked about since, like, at all. Number 5. Blindfold. It's interesting that Blindfold wears a blindfold, as she was born with no eyes or eye sockets for her to blind with a fold. But don't think being unable to see is some kind of handicap. Blindfold is wildly powerful. Blindfold's powers are psychically based and are strongest in telepathy and wielding astral energy, which she can make solid to do a number of things, including creating armor, weapons, force fields, and energy blasts, and using it to cast her astral projections into the physical world. Using her telepathy, sometimes in conjunction with the astral plane and its energies, Ruth is capable of astral travel, psychometry, precognition, retrocognition, clairvoyance, psychic possession, mental influence, and she even has some chaos manipulation. She also has a degree of telepathic resistance, meaning telepaths can't read her mind, but they can still possibly attack it and possess it and all that fun stuff. And in at number 4 is Destiny. After talking about Ruth, it seems like a logical shift to talk about her possible great-grandmother, Irene Adler. Irene Adler, otherwise known as Destiny as a mutant, has a long history going all the way back to the 19th century, and she was even in a relationship with Mystique all the way back when. While she has her eyes, unlike Blindfold, Irene is indeed physically blind. But it's okay, as she could still see the future. That's because Destiny has the mutant power of precognition, able to mentally scan the probability spectrum of alternate futures, and by concentrating, she could focus on only the most probable alternate futures. She could scan the alternate futures that existed from 1 second away up until those that existed 15 minutes away, but she could be 97% accurate if her predictions were 10 seconds away or less, allowing her to basically see what she was doing even though she couldn't see what she was doing. Number 3. Exodus. This character is one a lot of you may actually know is pretty powerful, as he does have a seat on the Krakoan Quiet Council and is insanely capable. Exodus actually began as Grand Duke Benet du Paris in the 12th century as a nobleman hailing from the medieval France. He was sent to fight in the Crusades in the Holy Lands, and on his journey out there, that's when his mutant powers awoke. And he even gained further enhancements from the mutant apocalypse, becoming one of his champions before being entombed until the modern era when Magneto awoke him and teamed up with him. He is one of the most powerful mutants alive. He is an Omega level psionic, using the abilities of telepathy, telekinesis, teleportation, and empathy. His level of telekinesis is so fine-tuned that he can even use it to manipulate things on the molecular and subatomic scales, allowing him to disassemble or reassemble complex devices, explosively even, and he's even been able to do this gaining control over electrons in an atom. He can create force fields, concussive blasts, electromagnetic blasts, and fly at speeds of around Mach 2. But he further uses his telekinesis to enhance his strength, speed, and reflexes to an impressive degree, as well as using his abilities to heal himself and others, resurrecting and fixing the atoms that make up our bodies. And that's all alongside his other abilities, including enhanced durability, longevity, healing factor, and a psionic vampirism. Number 2. Cosmar. When Tashi Rapina first showed up in 2020, her mutant powers caused a little bit of a problem. Tashi has Waneric reality warping, essentially meaning her dreams branch out and affect the reality around her, trapping her and whoever is around in the dreams. Now, people trapped in there can be physically or telepathically affected by these abilities. So, for example, when she was having a nightmare, some guards discovered her and were turned into monsters by her abilities, but it only added to the fuel of her nightmare, making things a lot more worse. Her abilities can also show others their dreams or fears. It took Wildside using their abilities to make Tashi's nightmares into a pleasant dream to free those who had been trapped inside. It's a bonkers power, and its emergence affected her physically too, which led her on a mission to try and find a way to look more human again. But her ability is definitely one of the more unique ones I've seen, with those who become trapped in her dreams being connected in one neural network with Tashi and used as a power source. Number 1. Danny Moonstar. Okay, a bunch of you guys mentioned Danny Moonstar in the comments of the last part, as there was a mutant that had a similar shtick. But Danny's powers are much much more advanced than those of Beltane. While Beltane can create illusions of people's fears, Dani's powers only started here, but now she can create three-dimensional images of certain visual concepts from thoughts and emotional impressions within the minds of either herself or others. It used to be just fears, but then it moved on to deepest desires, and then as she grew, so too did her power to allow her to create images from thoughts and less intense emotions. So, as an example, as this actually happened, say Dani and Cannonball walk into a high-class hotel dressed casually. So to blend in, Dani used the image of what a well-dressed hotel guest would look like from the mind of the desk clerk and disguise both herself and her teammate in those images. She could do this with multiple people at once as well, creating illusions that were almost real to the person whom they belonged. But with a little help from Professor X, she was able to create an image that was physically tangible. That's her potential, but so far it's only happened the one time. Normally her power is used more as a psychological tool or trick, but it's not her only thing. Having powers that are psionic in nature, she can actually focus her powers into energy arrows which can stun someone by disrupting their central nervous system or force them to relive a traumatic memory. And as she grew, these arrows became more capable of physical harm.